Well, hello everybody. Are we live? We better be live. We're fucking live. We are live. Happy Halloween, everybody, and welcome to night 6 of the live reading of Pavor Nocturnus, which is Latin for night terrors. Anyways, got no Halloween trick-or-treaters coming to my house. Because they know I'm kind of that weirdo guy that just sits in his house and writes books and shit. So maybe once in a while you'll catch me at the bar playing guitar or something. But anyhow, yeah. So it's Halloween night. The book is now available on Amazon. If you want to go hit Amazon up and look up Bradley L. Bodeker, Bodeker, and it should bring you to my book page with my bookshelf, which has got all my books that I've written and published. And you can pick and choose what you want there. You can pick up tonight's book, Pavor Nocturnus, my latest one. I believe, let's see here. Yes, so it is $16.99 for the paperback and $7.99 for the Kindle version. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is free, of course. So, yeah, so check that out. Please buy it. One of the things I do ask, if you do pick the book up, is go back onto Amazon when you're done reading it and review it. Please, good, bad, mediocre, whatever. Just please review it. The number of reviews that I get help my book become more, how'd you put it? It'll become recommended on book searches when people are clicking around for something to read. So yeah, that would help me out. Also, be sure to head down to youtube.com/Bradley Bodeker 70 / I think there's another /. Anyway, head down there and subscribe to that. Subscribe to this channel, my Beehive page, and it kind of gives you updates on everything that I'm trying to do creatively with my life, which maybe I haven't done enough with it, but I am certainly trying now. I am trying really hard to do something creative and put more out there and to be a little more active with my page here. The more subscribers I get, and when I say subscribe, that doesn't mean you're paying a subscription price. You're just subscribing and say, yeah, I subscribe to Brad Bodeker. The more you do that, the more things I can do with this page and with my YouTube page. I can, and again, I'm just kind of learning all this broadcast stuff and learning how to do podcasts and stuff like that. I do have some things coming up on the YouTube page. I would like to do a friend of mine, Jim West, and myself. We were planning on doing some movie reviews, and yeah, trying to find the worst B movies out there and review the hell out of them. So that's some of the things we're looking at doing with the channel. Would like to do some skit stuff and so on and so forth. Anyways, tonight we are reading the last chapter of the book, The Last Nightmare. And it's a long one because it ties together all the books or all the chapters that I've read before tonight, and kind of gives you closure on all the characters that we've been learning about and having adventures with here in the last 5 days. So it's going to be lengthy. I've just tried I ran through the chapter tonight, and it went about 2 hours. So usually every night it's been just 1 hour. So tonight we're looking at maybe a couple hours, which is fine, right? You guys will hang with me for 2 hours, won't you? Hopefully. So, well, hopefully this is broadcasting, and I don't have to redo this again like what happened Saturday night or whatever. Anyhow, folks, I'm going to jump into this right now, get this book finished up. Um, Chapter 10, it's called Joe Takes a Dirt Nap. Now, this nightmare, the reason why it is the last story of the book is it was given to me by a very, very close friend of mine, Joe Saul, and everybody calls him Pimo. He owned a bar in town. Him and I became really good friends. Boom, boom, boom. And the guy's very creative himself. But he told me about this nightmare, and I kept getting it mixed up all the time. But from what I gather, he had this dream, or maybe it was a trip or whatever. But he would he'd get high, throw on his headphones, and listen to Kiss Destroyer, and just kind of trip out. And then there was like this little ghost person and said, "Hey, you've got to go into this house and defeat this evil that's in this house." And he had to do it in a hurry because the house was shrinking. So my thought was that this character Joe was going to kind of go into the same thing, but he was going to go into this house and rescue the dreamers that we have been reading about in the past week. All the dreamers that are in this book are going to get a visit from our hero, Joe. So, that being said, I would suggest you get comfortable, find something you want to sip on. And since this is the release, the official release of Pavor Nocturnus, I'm going to take a nice little sip off of my favorite whiskey, Proper 12. Maybe Conor McGregor will give me a little. Anyway. So, cheers to you, folks. Boom. Oh, that's smooth. Gotta love the Irish. Now I'll be choked up for the whole read. All right. Here we go. Joe takes a dirt nap. "Hey, asshole," came his stepdad's voice. "Wake the fuck up. I'm taking your mom out." Joe rubbed his eyes. They were a little bloody from sleep and a fuck ton of pot. Another pounding on the bedroom door. "If you don't wake up, I'll come in there and I'll pull you out of bed," his stepdad yelled. "I heard you," Joe yelled back. Joe and his stepdad didn't get along. He didn't like the way he treated his mom, and Joe was treated like a piece of shit. He thought several times about running away, but he had a kid sister, and he didn't want to leave her behind. "About fucking time," his stepdad spat as he opened his bedroom door. "Now come on, your mother and I are going to be late, and your sister's hungry." "Whatever," Joe mumbled. "What the fuck did you say to me?" I heard what you said. You better watch yourself. Are you fucking stoned?" "Are you?" "God damn it. Kay, do something with your kid before I lose my shit." Joe's mom stepped out of the bathroom. She was always the level head in the family through everything that went on in their lives. "Honey," she said to Joe, "please fix your sister something for dinner, won't you?" "Yeah, Mom." "Thank you." She kissed his cheek and went to the closet to grab her sweater. "Have a good night, kids," she kissed her daughter. "You behave yourself for your brother, okay?" "Yeah, Mom," she said. Joe made mac and cheese with salsa. It was the way his sister liked it, and it was easy to make. They both watched a horror movie on the VCR, and then he sent her to bed. This was the ritual. His stepdad loved to drink, and his mom loved being with him. They'd go out almost every night. Joe didn't mind because he wouldn't have to be around his stepdad. He and his sister would kick back and watch a movie, and she'd either go off to bed or sit up at reading in bed. Joe, on the other hand, loved to load his bong, finish a bowl, put on Kiss Destroyer, and put on headphones and chill. The weed must have had a little extra in it. After choking on the smoke for a few minutes and the magic carpet arrived to give him that floating feeling, the lights began to flare. That was something new, and part of him wondered what that something was. He took a deep breath and decided to try to ride it out. The flare became prisms. Rainbows made up of colors he had never seen before danced all around him. A smell assaulted his nostrils. At first it was like flowers, and then it became something stronger and more earthy. A metallic taste rose in his saliva glands. "What the fuck is this?" he muttered to himself. He sat up in bed, and the headphone cord pulled out of his stereo. Detroit Rock City blared out of his speakers. He pulled the headset off and tried to stand up to get to his stereo to turn it down before his sister woke up. His legs failed him, and he hit the ground. "Fucking Hector," his thoughts echoing in his head. "You laced the motherfucker." Hector Matthews was his friend and his source for weed. He had been known to sprinkle a little magic in his pot from time to time. Great Expectations began to blare out of the speakers next. Joe attempted to get himself up to at least hit the power on his stereo. He fell into it instead, and the record skipped. He decided just to lay there on the floor until whatever mindfuck was happening decided to mellow. "Joe," came a tiny whisper. "Joe, wake up." The fuck? He lifted his head off the carpet, drool leaking from the corner of his mouth. "You must wake up, Joe." The voice sounded like it belonged to a little child. At first he thought it was his sister, awoken by sounds of kiss. "Sorry, kiddo," he slurred. "Music too loud?" "Joe, I'm over here." He cranked his head around, and standing at his feet was the shape of a young boy. The boy was a monochrome color, like he was a hologram, jittering in the smoke of his bong. "Who?" Joe blinked his eyes several times. "Who the fuck are you?" "You wouldn't understand. Listen. You must do something very important." "I don't understand. What the fuck is happening? Am I tripping or—" "You're not hallucinating, Joe. This is real. You must help them." "Help who?" "The dreamers, Joe. You must rescue the dreamers." "Is this some Freddy Krueger bullshit? Fuck that." The boy's image began to flicker, as if this strip of film was beginning to end. "You must hurry. Losing cohesion. Joe, you are Zavichel. Please." What? The word sounded Polish, like something his grandmother used to say when he was little. "Come back here." The image was gone. The taste and smell in his mouth was gone. He tried to lift his head again, and it spun, and the room went crooked, and he passed out. That was back in 1985. He didn't have another episode like that since. He was managing a bar now, living in the upstairs apartment. His mom had died a few years ago, and his stepfather shortly before that. He'd grown a beard now. His hair was still long, but turning gray in random streaks. He suffered what the majority of Gen Xers suffered from after 40. Hypertension, prediabetes, back pain, and losing eyesight. But the life of a bar manager didn't have time to eat healthy, exercise daily, watch blood sugar levels, etc., etc. Lucky if he had time to take a shit during the day, leave alone take care of his body. But he was upright and walking on this side of the grass, so he figured he was winning. It was a dead night for the bar. He had let his 2 waitresses go, kept Jenny around to bartend, and he sat in the kitchen to cook. Thursdays were usually a busy night, but after the meat raffle, folks just went home. A couple of regulars sat in their usual stools, pissing away their paychecks on pull tabs. But otherwise, it was dead. It was 9 p.m., and Joe decided he was going to scrape the grill and drain the fryer, close the kitchen for the night. If someone wanted food after that, they could order a Hedgie's pizza. "Jen," he said to the bartender, "I'm closing the kitchen. Pour me a Southern Diet." Jen knew the routine and had the cocktail done before he finished his order and handed it to him. "That's why I loves ya." "Well, that's why you pay me the big bucks," she joked. He was on his fourth by the time the kitchen was cleaned. He was mopping the greasy floor when he noticed the lights flicker. He stopped mopping and looked around. They flickered again, but the bar lights stayed steady. "What the fuck?" he muttered to himself. That's when a familiar taste showed up in his mouth. It was metallic and almost coppery. He ran his finger through his mouth and looked to see if his gums were bleeding. Nothing but saliva. He wrung out his mop and then dumped the dirty mop water in the big sink out back. He ran another bucket for Jenny when she was ready to close. He sat down at his usual spot at the end of the bar. The lights weren't flickering out here, but they were starting to flare a little bit. "You okay?" Jen asked. He rubbed his eyes and drank the rest of his drink. "Yeah," he said, bourbon dripping from his mustache. "Eyes are getting tired." Jen sat with a fresh drink in front of him. "You look like shit," she said. "No offense." "None taken. I take that as a compliment." He tipped his drink and gulped down half. The lights were flaring fiercely now. Little prisms shimmered at the edge of them. "Think I'm gonna go upstairs for a while." "Okay." You closing okay? You got closing okay?" Most of the big stuff is done, boss man. I just have vacuuming and mopping to do. I'll count out the till and leave the money bags in the safe. You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, I think so. Just leave the keys in my mailbox. I'll come up and check on you after closing, okay?" "I'll be fine." He got up and the room tilted a little, and he almost fell over. Jen caught him. The regulars got up and stumbled over to him. "What's up, Joe?" Fritzy slurred. "You need help upstairs?" "Fuck, Fritzy," Jen laughed. "You can't even walk yourself. Sit your worthless ass down. I got this." Joe told the boys to stay in their bar stools till Jen got back downstairs. They acknowledged the best they could, and he and his bartender headed up the steep staircase to his apartment. She plopped him down on his couch. His head was swimming, and he didn't want to keep his eyes open. That metal tang in his mouth was getting stronger. "The fuck did you put in them drinks?" he muttered. "Just your usual," she said, slightly offended. "Southern Comfort and Coke from the gun. Unless your ice cubes are tainted, I don't know what you got into." "Grab me a bucket, will you? Then you better get downstairs before Fritzy drinks the bar dry." She handed him the bucket she found under the sink, and she said she'd check on him later and left. Joe spit out a wad of that taste and laid his head down on the couch pillow. "Alexa," he shouted to his AI, "play Kiss Destroyer." "Playing Kiss Destroyer on Amazon Music," she said with a hint of personality. The lights in his apartment began to flicker like they did in the bar's kitchen. "Oh, fuck," he groaned. "Here we go." The smell of flowers, freshly cut, began to invade his nostrils. Beautiful at first and comforting, and then they got stronger and took on the scent of wet leaves and dirt. He grabbed the bucket and puked the last 6 cocktails he inhaled that night. Violently it came out, leaving that sour taste of bile mixing with the metallic taste. Joe was on the floor now, one hand cradling the bucket, the other his stomach. "Stop this," he cried. "Please, for the love of God, stop this." "Joe!" It was that little boy's voice from long ago. "You're back. Are you ready to help them now?" "Not you. God damn it. Not the little Freddy Krueger kid again. Fuck me." "There's no time, Joe. You must help them. It may already be too late." "Fuck, dude. I can't even help myself right now." "You can do this. You're the Zvavichel. But you must hurry." "Zvavichel? What the fuck is..." The little boy's image was just like before, like he was just a hologram flickering in the air. But his hand was solid. as he slapped Joe across the face. Twice. "The fuck was that for?" he said, holding his cheek. "There isn't time for any of this, Joe." The boy was getting impatient. "There are souls that depend on you. Wake up. Wake the fuck up." "Does your mama know you talk like that?" "Our mama is dead, Joe. You know that." "Wait." Joe began to sober up. His head was still cloudy, but he was beginning to become alert. "Did you say our mama?" "Yes." How can that be? It was just me and my sister growing up." "Our sister. Are you?" "No, you can't be." "I'm part of you. Pull yourself together. You must go in there and help them." "Going where?" The boy backed away and aimed his gaze at a small door that was on the wall. "What the fuck is that? That wasn't there before." "Beyond the doorway," the boy said. "It's the land of Nod. You must go there and help the dreamers. They're in trouble and could be losing their souls as we speak." The door was about 3.5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. It was made from old rotted barnwood. "I can't." Joe was more alert than he had been in a long time. "I can't go in there. I won't fit inside of that." "You can now, but it grows smaller. It was normal size. It was a normal size door when we met last." The boy turned the rusty brass knob and opened the door. Beyond was a dark hallway. What is? "It's the land of Nod. It's a place where you go when you dream. Beyond this door lies the House of Pavor Nocturnus. The house is a living thing. It's sentient. It has trapped dreamers within its walls and feeds on their nightmares." "What can I do?" he said with fear filling his stomach. "I can't do anything for them." "But you can, Joe. You're the Zabichel. You're the savior." Long ago, when Joseph Salinsky was a young boy of around 7, he was playing in the backyard of his grandmother's house. She lived on a 400-acre farm in northern Minnesota. He loved playing with the chickens and the goats and petting the cows. He had a favorite barn cat that used to follow him around. On this particular day, he was walking around grandmother's flower beds. Monarch butterflies were dancing around the petals of her morning glories and tulips. He was following one and was watching it rest on the petal of a black-eyed Susan. Maja, the barn cat, a mischievous black and white barn cat that was up on her haunches, ready to pounce on it. "No, Maja," he scolded. "Leave the butterfly alone." Maja's attention turned to a whirring sound to the right. It was a soft sound that gently tickled his ears to hear it. He spotted what looked like a snake slithering around the flower bed, but it was slithering around in midair. "What is?" His eyes wide and a little scared. "Grandma?" He didn't shout for his grandmother. His throat was too tight. The flying snake made its way towards the butterfly. It was an impossible green color like none he had ever seen before. Insectile wings beat so fast they were blurry and hard to make out. As it got closer, he noticed it had 2 tiny legs in the front towards its triangular head and 2 more towards the back of its tail. The butterfly fluttered her wings and danced her way to the far side of the flower beds. Joe followed the flying snake, which began to weave its way to where the butterfly had gone. His little kid zipping through the tall prairie grass just in time to see the snake's tongue whip out of its mouth and snatch the monarch and drag it rapidly into its mouth. Maja trampled through all the tall flowers and leapt at it. It slithered in several series of S shapes and then blurred itself into thin air. Both Joe and his favorite barn cat Maja ran to the house screaming for Grandma. "Calm yourself, Joseph," her Polish accent heavy and thick. "What are you so excited about?" "There was a flying snake out in your garden," He was both hyperventilating and shouting, It ain't a butterfly! Maja saw it too! Grandma stared out at her garden. Her eyes were so dark brown that they were almost black. Though so deeply dark they were still happy eyes. Her pale cheeks painted rose from the daily chores. Where is it now, Joseph? She said, placing her hand on his shoulder. He paused for a moment. She could tell that his brain was trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. With sadness, she watched the wonder leave his face and reality take its place. It disappeared. His arms went slack and fell to his sides, and then he plopped himself onto the little bench Grandpa had made. It was really there, he said in a defeated tone accentuated by his lower lip. Honest it was, Grandma. Grandma sat down next to him, her plump hips squeezing him a little into the armrest of the bench. She placed an arm around him and gently patted his shoulder. What you saw, Joseph, she said, was what we used to call a smock in the old country. A smock? Yes, it's what your fairy tale books would call a dragon. Every country has their own name for them, but your ancestors called them smocks. So, you believe me? Yes, of course I do, my darling child. She hugged him tightly and then released him. I suppose I should tell you a little about us, about the family, about you, and about me. I know we came from Poland, Joe said. Yes, but we are more than just ordinary Poles, grandson. So much more. What do you mean? You come from a long line of Zwabichels, or saviors. What are Zwabichels? Do you remember your dreams, Joseph? Yes, especially the scary ones. Where do you think those dreams come from? Joe looked puzzled for a moment, then said, My head? Grandma gave a deep laugh and then said, True, but they come from somewhere farther, somewhere deeper. Like on another planet? Close. There's a whole other world. Some call it the land of Nod, or place of sleep. It exists only because we exist. We dream it into existence. All those dreams we have take form in this land of Nod. Why can't we see it? We can when we dream, but sometimes, oh dear, sometimes those things we dream about come over here. Joe thought about some of the terrible nightmares he had and shivered. That's where our ancestors come in. We stand at the bridge and stop anything from coming over here. Those people are called saviors or Zwabichels. Are you a Zwabichel? I am. So is your great-grandfather, and so will you be. Me? The time will come, Joseph, when it will be your turn to stand at the gate and protect us all from what lies beyond the bridge. Joe thought about this for a bit in his 8-year-old brain. When? He asked finally. My dear boy, she said, looking out at her flower beds. When I pass, you will need to take over. But I don't want you to pass, he was getting upset. Not ever. She cuddled him and kissed his forehead. Dearest, we all must pass on sometime. It's inevitable. It's not such a horrible thing. But don't worry. Don't worry yourself. I'll help you along the way before that happens, okay? Okay, he agreed. How did that smock get across over here? There are places where the wall between here and there is thin. Sometimes things get across on their own. Places like here, it is thin. There are other places too, but those are also guarded by others like us. Joe sat perplexed by this conversation. The air felt heavy and hot, left them both breathless to some degree. He could hear the cicadas singing in the trees in his grandmother's grove. To some it may sound eerie, but to Joe it would be like a heavenly chorus. It was comforting. It was a comforting sound all the way into his adult life. "Live well, Joseph," Grandma warned. "Take care of yourself and live good." "I will, Grandma." "I know you will." Adult Joe finally understood. Remembering that day and his grandmother's words sobered him up. That small doorway sat in the wall like a mouth waiting to swallow him. Beyond were the hallways into the nightmares of others, and it was he who was to walk through that doorway and wake them up. The image of the little boy was him, the memory of him from the day that he saw a real live dragon. When he was told by his grandmother about what he was here to do, that image was gone now, fully remembered. He crouched in the doorway and felt the cold, damp air blow through his hair. Screams and groans were heard from some faraway room in the House of Pavor Nocturnus, the house of night terrors. He stood up on the other side and walked down the crooked hallway, gooseflesh standing on end, to the first door, and opened it. Cold, damp air gushed out of the doorway and blew his hair back. It was the sickening type of cold air that one would feel within a crypt. Joe felt the arthritis in his back kick in. It looked to be the bedroom of a little boy. On one wall was a blue shag carpeting. Star Wars poster adorned one side of his bedroom, and on the other was a mix of Farrah Fawcett and Lonnie Anderson posters taken from the latest issues of Tiger Beat magazine. Tiger Beat, Joe thought to himself. Must be in the 70s. In the corner, surrounded by action figures and their respective vehicles, was a small, furry rocking chair. The same color blue as the shag carpeting on the wall. On the other side of the room sat a small single bed with a small human shape shifting beneath the covers. As he made his way to the bed, the rocking chair began a slow rock. "What the fuck?" Joe jumped. The chair stopped in mid-rock and then made its way slowly back to its original position. "It's the devil," said a little voice behind him. He spun around, and sitting upright in the bed was this little boy. He looked to be about 7 or 8, black hair matted to his face from sweat and dark circles under his deep brown eyes. "Hey, little man," Joe said cautiously. "What's your name?" "Brandon," the little boy said in a hushed voice. "Brandon, my name is Joe." "He won't like you being here." "Who won't?" "The devil." "There's no devil, not here." The little boy's eyes got wide and his mouth dropped open. He pointed towards the rocking chair. Joe spun around and crouched on the back of the little blue rocking chair sat something out of a Clive Barker novel. Joe almost lost control of his bladder. "The fuck is that?" He jumped onto the bed with Brandon. "Brandon," it whispered to the boy. Most of its body was made up of shadow. 2 red pupilless eyes blazed from obsidian sockets. The shape of ram's horns jutted from its boil-infested brow. "It's," the boy stuttered. It's the devil." "Let's get out of here," Joe urged, grabbing Brandon's tiny hand. "The boy stays," it hissed. "I have to stay," Brandon said with a frown. "He has my mom." "I'll take your father too, whelp." Joe pulled Brandon to him, cradling him in his arms, and slid off the bed. "He won't let us leave," Brandon began to buck. Suddenly, there was a loud, ear-splitting screech, and Joe almost lost his grip on Brandon. "Mama," Brandon said. Joe felt sharp claws rip into his back and make their way across the shoulder blades. He dropped to his knees, still sheltering Brandon from the attack. "Let the boy go," the devil said. "He belongs to me." Fuck off, Joe shouted and stumbled his way towards the door. The door slammed shut, and Joe turned just in time to catch a set of claws ripping into his face, tearing from his brow to his chin. He screamed out in pain and dropped Brandon. The mother thing screeched at him again and scooped up her son and flung Brandon onto the bed. Best you leave before Mother rips you to shreds, the devil said with a predatory grin. I'm not leaving the boy, Joe said defiantly. Blood was dripping into his eye from his wounds, which felt like they were on fire. Suit yourself. This should be amusing. The mother snarled and knocked Joe into the opposite wall, his wounds and back screaming at him just to lay down and die. But he got back up and tried to take a swing. He overshot, and she dug her claws in a stabbing motion into his rib cage. He could feel her nails wiggling in between his rib cage, tearing the cartilage apart. The agony was too much, and he thought he would go insane if she didn't withdraw from him. But she didn't. She wriggled her fingers, pulling his ribs apart slowly. Leave the boy to me, the devil spoke, and I will have Mother pull her claws from you. Joe looked at Brandon, shivering on his bed, tears gushing from his deep-set brown eyes. His mother wriggling her fingers again to reinforce the devil's bargain. Okay, Joe shouted in defeat. Okay, just please, release me. Are you sure? The devil asked. Mother's fingers writhed inside his rib cage, causing him to scream out again. Yes! She dropped him to the ground, and he fell into a heap. Go, then. Never return. Holding his rib cage, his long hair stuck to his bloodied face, he crawled out the door of the bedroom. He looked up and caught a glimpse of Brandon with his hopeless expression on his face. I'm so sorry, Joe tried to say before the door slammed in his face. He wept, drowning in the failure he felt. I'm sorry, kid, he said to himself. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't take the pain anymore. There was a faintly familiar whirring sound coming from down one of the hallways. It gave off a bright yellow glow. Jesus, Joe muttered. Now what the fuck is coming this way? The noise got louder and the glow was brighter, and to his left a baseball-sized orb of light zigzagged through the air and then hovered before him. Inside the orb was a snake-like creature, with insectile wings whirring like a hummingbird. It's a smock, Joe thought to himself. More than that, grandson, the orb said. Nana? He said in his defeated voice. Get up, Yosef. You have sleepers to save. I can't. I'm afraid I've failed. And now I'm dying. You're not dying. You are Zavichel. Stand up. Joe looked down at his wounds. They were absent. Even the pool of his own blood, which he thought was gathering around him, was not there. His face, back, and ribs ached, but they were not harmed. You healed me, he said. No, Yosef. Things work differently over here, his grandmother said. You were wounded, just in your mind. The things that exist here exist in your mind, and those that are trapped here. But they feel so fucking real. The things that dwell in the House of Pavor Nocturnus are very powerful. They have fed on these energies of the captive dreamers that sleep within its walls. You will see and experience many horrors within, not just your own, but those of others. You must remember that you are a power too. You must help these dreamers believe in you and believe in yourself to draw your own power. Fuck, Nana. I don't think I can do this. You must. You were born with compassion for others. Now stand up, and you help that boy. Son of a... And watch your language. Yes, Nana. Good boy. You've got this, Yosef. I believe in you. Joe braced himself against the wall and slid himself upright. His back ached and his ribs felt severely bruised, but he shook it off and looked up at the door he had just crawled out of. The orb began to glow even brighter and then enveloped him in its light. He felt warmth wash over him and his aches began to subside. He felt strength return to his muscles. He walked up to the door and kicked it. A long crack appeared in the middle of its old rotted wood. He gave it another kick, feeling the splinters hit his shins, and the door fell into a pile of sawdust into the room. The same cold wind blew some of those dust particles into his face. "Brandon," he shouted across the room, "it's time to wake up." Brandon's frightened eyes looked over at Joe and then back at the devil, still hunched on the back of the tiny rocking chair with its oily, blacked talon feet. "Back for more," the devil taunted. "I've held this sleeper for over 40 years. Your pathetic attempts won't free him now." "Brandon, listen to me." Joe walked intentionally towards Brandon's bed. "This is all just a horrible dream. There is no devil here." Out of the blackness of the boy's closet, his mother crawled out, razor-sharp talons clicking and scraping at the floor, her mouth wide open and ear-splitting screeches blaring from deep in her throat. Brandon pulled his blankets around him and covered his head. Mother leapt at Joe, and he caught her by the throat. She began to thrash and claw at his face. "Brandon," he hollered, "wake up! This is only a nightmare." "But," Brandon screamed back, muffled by the covers, "but, Mom." The mom thing tried to stab her claws into his ribs again, but this time they couldn't penetrate his flesh. "Look at me, Brandon," Joe pleaded. "This is not your mother." Brandon reluctantly pulled the cover from his face and peeked towards the thing that had disguised itself as his mother. In her place was a shapeless mass of bubbling black goo. Faces tried to form inside that mass, but would melt back into it. "This is not your mother, Brandon. This is nothing." "Don't listen to him, Brandon," the devil cried. "She is your mother. I am the devil. The devil, damn it." "Your mother's waiting for you on the other side, buddy. You just have to wake up." The thing in Joe's grasp undulated and puddled at his feet. Brandon slid himself to the edge of the bed and looked at the devil. "You're not real either," he said as strongly as he could. "Silly boy," it laughed. "I am more real than you think. I live in your tiny little boy mind. I will stay here and haunt every dream your bratty little mind can." Joe kicked the rocking chair out from underneath it, and its arms flailing for balance did not stop it from hitting the floor in a puff of charcoal-colored mist. "Come on, buddy. Let's get out of here." Brandon leapt off the bed into Joe's arms. They walked out of the empty room that darkened as they left. When they reached the hallway, the doorway had melted away, and an old rotted wall took its place. "You saved me," Brandon said as Joe put him down. "You saved yourself, little man," Joe said. "Now, you just have to wake up, okay?" "But I am awake." I'm afraid not. You've been asleep for a long time, and when you wake up, the world is going to look a little different. Your parents are going to look a little different. Even you are going to look a little different, but it will be okay." "Okay." Close your eyes super tight. Take a deep, long breath and open them. Are you ready? "Yeah." Close them up tight. No peeking. Brandon squeezed his eyes tight. "Now take a deep breath and hold it." Brandon filled his little lungs with as much air as he could. "When I count to 3, I want you to let out all that air and then open your eyes. Are you ready? Brandon nodded his head. 1, 2, 3. Somebody get the doctor, a voice said. Brandon's eyes struggled to break free of the crust that held him closed. Get his parents on the phone, the same voice ordered. Mom? He tried to say, but it came out in a gravelly mumble that hurt the back of his throat. His eye opened and fluttered, and the view was cloudy. Blurry shapes were moving about, and there were machines beeping and pinging in the background. It's okay, sir, a nurse said. Welcome back. He tried to speak again, but his throat wouldn't allow it. He felt dusty and full of sand. He attempted to move his hand to wipe his mouth. It felt like it was creaking, and it was heavy. His other eye opened, and his hands looked far too big to be his. You've been asleep for a very long time, the nurse said, trying to wet his eyes with a damp cloth. I'll get you some water. When his hand reached his face, he felt facial hair on his chin. Sorry, we haven't been able to shave you in a few days. Usually your dad takes care of that. He'll be happy to see you're awake. Dad? He mumbled. Another nurse came into his bedroom. Dr. Schultz is on her way. She's up on 5 dealing with an overdose. Did you get a hold of his parents? The first nurse asked. Yes, they'll be here in 20 minutes. Brandon smiled. The House of Pavor Nocturnus trembled in anger. Never had it lost its nourishment so suddenly. It was ripped from its rotted wood hands. For nearly 30 years it had kept this food in a deep sleep to dream its delectable dreams, only to be denied by the whim of some interloper. No matter, it thought. There were plenty more milk cows to feed it. Soon it would be powerful enough to leave the land of Nod for good, to unleash its progeny on the puny little insects that inhabit the land of lucidity, and they will feed. Oh, how they will feed. As to this stranger that wanders its halls, this self-righteous savior, it has its own fears, its own nightmares, and if need be, it will become food itself. There's always a weakness, always a chink in the armor. It had been feeding since the dawn of man, and it had experience and wiles that it could use, the tricks and glamours it would employ to tear this savior apart. After the boy had vanished, Joe stood up and took his own deep breath. The walls and the rafters above seemed to rattle and creak. Dust puffed out in ancient cracks in the foundation. Great, he thought. The damn roof's going to come down on my head. At the end of the hallway to his left was what looked like an elevator door. He walked up to and touched its metallic surface. There were no buttons near it or levers. Open, he whispered. There was a rattle and a hum of gears and pistons moving about. Then the door slid open and hot desert heat gushed out. A scent of sweat and rot invaded his nose. As he slowly entered the room, he realized he was in some form of cell. The strong odor of excrement wafted from a rusty bucket in the corner of the room. Lying on the ground was a woman who looked like she had been beaten, clothed in a tattered smock that was so stained its original color was lost. Jesus Christ, lady, are you okay? He kneeled beside her. She moaned and coughed, spits out a wad of blood and mucus. Do I look okay? She mutters. A small grin touches the corner of his cheek. You need to wake up. You need to fuck off. Haven't you people had your way with me enough? Fuck off, go pound sand, eat shit, bark at the moon. I don't care what you do, just leave me the fuck alone. I don't think you understand. I don't know what you've been through, but I'm here to help you. Well, you're too late. No, I'm not. You just need to wake up. Look around. Does this look like any place you want to be awake in? The large metal door to the cell begins to thrum, and with a menacing hiss, it slides open. Two armored soldiers come in carrying large poles that have electrical arcing tips. Get up, bitch, one of them says. Time to meet the potentate. Eat shit, the woman spat. The soldier hit her with the electric rod, and bright blue fingers of electricity coursed through her body. She seized up as the other soldier hit her with his weapon, intensifying the charge. Joe ran at them and tackled one into the other. Joe knocked one unconscious, and the other was trying to hit him with their electric prod. He was able to block it and hold on to it. While they both struggled for control over the weapon, the woman rolled over and spotted the other staff lying beside the unconscious soldier. Give me a hand, will ya? Joe grunted. She swung the rod into the nape of the soldier's neck, and sparks exploded above Joe's head. He could see blue flames spark from the soldier's eye sockets, and then he dropped on top of him. Nice job, Joe said, pushing the soldier's body off him. She held the staff in Joe's face, electricity snapping and popping inches from it. He put his hands up. My name is Joe. The fuck are you doing here, Joe? Are you here to help me, or are you another plant here to trick me? I'm really here to help you. Who sent you? My grandma? Your what? Never mind. It's crazy. Look, all of this is a dream or nightmare. None of this is real. She lowered her staff, still crackling with electricity. The bodies of the two soldiers turned into bubbling puddles of tar. What the fuck is going on? She said, and fear came back into her eyes. It's going to be okay, Joe said. I don't know how long you've been asleep, but there's something that keeps you in this nightmare, and it kind of feeds off it. Are you telling me all this torture I've endured, the people I've seen die in the most tragic ways, the years I've lived, they're all just nightmares? The cell door rumbled, and the heavy metal door fell onto the floor, splattering the mess that was once the soldiers. A tall man of Latin descent stood silhouetted in the doorway. He wore a white designer suit, which he was adjusting the tie. His face is blanketed in shadows, except for a faint red glow where his eyes should be. Who are you? The man asked. Joe looked at him, wondering what new kind of hell was being introduced to him. Did you hear me? I asked who you... His name is Joe, the woman said, and stabbed the man in the white with her staff. Motherfucker! The man in white grabbed onto the end of the staff that was charged. Blue fingers ripped up his arm. He threw his head back and moaned in pleasure. He pulled the staff from the woman's grasp and tossed it to the side. Oh, Pamela, the man smiled at her. It excites me to see you so defiant, only to have your hopes crushed in my palm of my hand. Joe looks over to her. Who's this guy? He's a piece of shit that... With the wave of his hand, he cuts off her sentence, and she is pushed back into the wall. I am Potentate Bestia de la Luz, the man says with some annoyance. I am the savior of this world. I am the Alpha and the Omega. Joe kneels to help Pam up. So this guy is a douchebag with a god complex? He asks her. That's about right, she says, wiping blood from her mouth. Bestia grabs Joe by the hair and pulls him up to face him. I don't know who you are, he says to him, eyes beginning to flare a more intense red than before. But you do not belong here. I will suggest you leave now before I need to re-educate you. Pam rushes Delaluz, but is slapped and she flies into the wall again. You're a fake, Joe says defiantly. Perhaps you need to know your place in this world, Joseph. Bestia carries Joe by the hair to a metal rack. Robotic arms swing down and lock his wrists, and pulls his arms above his head. Bestia then releases his hair and walks towards Pam, who is lying on the ground trying to get up. Go ahead, Mrs. Rothstein, get up. Delaluz produces a glowing blue cube from thin air. It pulsates like a heartbeat. He's not real, Pam, Joe says. He knows what you fear. Silence! I do know what she fears, Joseph, don't I? Pam's eyes widen and she shakes her head. Joe can see the battle-wear look in her face, and her body begins to tense up. Don't let him do this to you. I don't know what's in that fucking blue box, but it can't hurt you. Oh, can't it? Delaluz tosses the blue cube at Pam. It immediately combusts into living flame. It coils around her as she tries to crawl away from it, screaming. She has a crippling fear of fire, as you can see. It fascinates me how someone so strong in spirit can be paralyzed by fear by something so simple. Her screams are almost more than Joe can bear to hear. If you promise to leave, Joseph, I will release her. Her skin begins to blister. The nodules of skin pop and blacken. The layers of flesh peel back, revealing cooking muscle and charring bone. Stop this, motherfucker. This is totally up to you, Joseph. Stop interfering with me and leave. Go back to the land of lucidity. Pam, Joe shouts. The flames are not real. The pain is not real. You just need to wake the fuck up. You can do this. No, Bestia says. She can't. I can't, she says. Her screaming has stopped, and she is only crying through singed teardrops. I just can't, Joe. The fuck you can't. You're doing it. What? She asks. She realizes the pain is waning, and the sweet, sickening smell of her flesh is left. Your pain is gone because all your nerve endings have burnt to a crisp, you stupid cow. Bestia begins to sound desperate. The pain flutters back to her, and she screams again. No! She smashes her nearly skeletal hands onto the concrete floor. This is not real! Bestia backs up from her and then stares with narrowing eyes at Joe, who is smiling from his rack. Stop this, Bestia growls. Stop this, damn you! I'm not doing shit. It's all her. The smile beneath Joe's beard angers him. Delaluz produces another cube, but it bursts into a black mist and wisps away. You'll never free her, Joseph, he says to Joe. The rack that was holding Joe had melted into the same black fluid that was the soldier's. Joe lands on his feet and punches Bestia in the face. No one calls me Joseph but my Nana, douchebag. Pam's flesh begins to heal. The flames are still licking in at the air around her, but they are losing their intensity. You're doing it, girl. Delaluz growls and the entire room begins to quake. I'll tear your souls apart, he snaps. Pam punches her fist into his chest and rips out his heart. It beats frantically and begins to turn into ash and disintegrate through her fingers. Bestia crumples and falls into a splash of wet soot. Let's get out of here, Joe says, taking her hand. They run out of the doorway, and it vanishes, almost closing them up within the walls. The house is shaking again, beams are falling around them, and the floor undulates beneath them. You need to wake up now, Joe says. What about you? Pam asks. There's others I need to free. Please, hurry. I don't know how long this house is going to hold together. Well, do I pinch myself? How do I wake up? Close your eyes and take a deep breath. What? Just do it. Pam closes her eyes tight and sucks in a gulp of stale, dusty air, almost coughing when she does. Now hold it. When I count to 3, I need you to open your eyes. Got it? She nods. 1, 2, 3. She opens one eye and sees Joe standing there flabbergasted and then opens the other. What the fuck, Joe? She asks. Oh, shit. I don't know. He shakes his head. Am I stuck in here? Ah, Jesus. Am I stuck in this fucking hell? Joe surprises her with the back of his hand. A bright flash of light in her head, and she opens her eyes. The fuck? She says, sitting up, coughing. She looks around as her eyes begin to focus. She's in her bedroom. An oxygen monitor attached to her index finger and an EKG machine monitoring her heartbeat. Her youngest son, sitting by her, jumps in his seat and almost falls to the ground. Mom! He screams. That son of a bitch hit me, she says. Derek! Her son yells. Derek, come in here! Her oldest son comes running into the room. What the fuck's going... Her son sees his mother awake and sitting up in bed. Mom? What are you all looking at? Pam says to him. Well, you've been out for damn near a month, her oldest says, sitting on the bed next to her. I thought we were going to lose you. Well, why didn't you take me to the hospital or call an ambulance? Because we know how you feel about doctors, Mom. You weren't bleeding or anything. We just found you sleeping and we couldn't wake you up. We did have a doctor come out here to check on you. Where's my cigs? Maybe quit smoking, Mom. Please? She looked angrily at them, but then softened, seeing the concern in their eyes. I guess I probably should. Haven't smoked since I fell asleep. I guess I can try it awake. The boys smiled at one another. Give me a water or something. I'm parched as hell. When Derek returned with a glass of ice water, he asked, Who hit you? What? She said, taking a large gulp. When you woke up, you said someone hit you. Oh, that was Joe. Joe? You dreaming about boyfriends again, Mom? Pam slapped him on the arm. The house shook like a dog wriggling the wet out of its coat. That fucking thing had taken another morsel from its lips. There was a hint of fear that tingled within its void, and it turned into anger. The anger boiled and rattled the foundation. The house needed to rid itself of this parasite. It was losing precious nourishment. Delectable horrors played out within its walls. But how? This thing that named itself Joe had to have a weakness. Somewhere deep within his mind there must be a raw fear that is like an overripe fruit ready to burst open with maggots. The house must be ready. It must hold tight to the nectar-bearing fruit that currently hung in its orchard. Traps. It must set traps for this thing called Joe. There must be something to ensnare him in his fears. There must be. All right, I'm going to go refill with some coffee, so please hold still. And the coffee song. Coffee, 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 coffee. I love fucking coffee. Oh, how I love fucking coffee. It's so coffee. Coffee, coffee, coffee. That's not quite enough coffee. Here I go making more some coffee. Coffee, 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 coffee. All right, thanks for being patient. We're about halfway through chapter 10 here. It's been an hour, so I think we're doing good. All right. Let's do this. The floorboards were beginning to shatter beneath his feet and fall into a fathomless basement. He leapt from board to board until the house stopped and the floor solidified at the end of another hall. A brown wooden door stood before him with the number 3 attached to the top center of it. Joe approached the door when it opened, and what looked like a nurse backed out of the room. She was scribbling in a clipboard in exaggerated strokes, jabbing at each punctuation mark, and then When she finished, she hung it on the nail beside the door. "Excuse me, miss, Joe began to say, and then stopped suddenly as she turned around. Everything about her looked human. A maroon-colored nurse's scrubs, light brown hair tied back with a hair tie, a thin black watch attached to an equally thin wrist, a pair of white Doc Martens on dainty feet. A red-colored stethoscope hung around her neck. But that's where her human characteristics stopped. The face that stared into his own horrified face was a round maw filled with razor-sharp fangs that went down into a pulsating throat. The several rows of teeth, dripping with mucus-thickened ropes, buzzed like a garbage disposal. "Holy fuck!" he gasped. "The patient will see you now," the nurse said, and walked into the darkness of an adjoining hallway. He picked up the clipboard and read, "Patient, Stephanie D. Ornstein. Age 9. Night terrors. Allergies, starfish. Doctor's notes. You're too late, Joe. This one is already mine." "We'll see about that," Joe says to himself as he hangs the clipboard back up. The door opens on its own, the metal latch clunking, and then it swings slowly open on creaking hinges. He backs up, expecting another one of those nurse things to come out. Diana Ross's voice comes to life as if a record player starts up in mid-song from inside the room. It's a haunting melody that comes with a crackling sound of a dirty needle scraping the grooves of an album. "Do you know," Diana sings, "where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Do you know?" "Stephanie," he says into the hospital room. "Stephanie, wake up." She's lying in a hospital bed with what looks like a pink oxygen mask over her mouth. Next to her bed sits a television set that Joe guesses to be an early 1970s Zenith black and white set. Cartoon starfish are dancing in a line across the television screen that seems to go eerily in time with the theme to Mahogany. He reaches out to touch her foot. "Hey, kid," he says softly. "Gotta wake up." The blanket ripples and he quickly withdraws his hand. There are leathery sounds coming from beneath the covers as if a million bats are flapping their wings. "The fuck is that?" Joe croaks. "You're too late, Joe," comes a friendly male voice from the TV. "She's already become part of them. They've already won." Who the hell is... Joe looks at the familiar friendly face on the television set. A middle-aged man with a bowl cut and thick mustache smiles at him. The picture is black and white, but Joe knows for sure that the man's sport coat is red. "Captain?" he gasps. "Captain, is that you?" "In the flesh," Captain Kangaroo says. "Well, so to speak." "Well, that takes me back. You should go, Joe. It's far too late for her." "What's under those blankets?" "See for yourself. It's not pretty." Joe slowly pulls the covers back from Stephanie's body. Starfish in every color of the rainbow are attached to her body. They are pulsating as if they are draining her. "Jesus on a crutch," he gasps. One of them pulls itself free of Stephanie's flesh and looks up at him. Its mouth is just like the nurse's, only smaller. It gives out a tiny screech and goes back to feeding on the little girl, purring like the rest of them. "Those teeth," the captain says. "Dear God, those teeth." Joe looks at the television again. The good captain's face is half-eaten. Lumps of chewed flesh hang off its exposed cheekbones. The skin that is left is smeared with blood, mucus, and sucker marks. He turns back to Stephanie and realizes that it's not an oxygen mask on her mouth, but another starfish. Her green eyes terrified above it. "No, fuck," he says, reaching for the starfish on her face. "Oh, God." His fingers wrap around its leathery body, and he can feel it feeding on her. Its arms tighten onto her face, suckers digging deeper into her skin, blood begins to leak from her face where the suckers had been taken purchase. He can hear her muffled screams of pain. The heavy wooden door slams closed. A large portrait of a woman hangs on the door. "Remove yourself from my daughter, pervert," the portrait commands. "Who the hell is that?" Joe asks, still pulling at the starfish. "I'm her mother. Now back away or I'll have my children feast on you." "None of this is real," he shouts at the portrait. "Isn't it? Take him, my children." Stephanie sits upright and Joe is thrown back onto the floor. She swings her starfish-covered legs out of bed and stands up. She's being controlled by the pulsating mass attached to her like a marionette. "Do you know," Diana drones on, "where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Where are you going to? Do you know?" "Stephanie," he shouts, "you have to wake up. Come on, kid, you can do it." She only leaps creepily on him as he tries to back away. She pins him down and a round hole opens up in the pink starfish attached to her face. Little fangs spin in its mouth and bite down onto his cheek. "What the fuck?" he screams as he feels its teeth burrow into his cheek. He tries to push her off him, but the starfish covering her body open their mouths and try to burrow into his hands. "Wake up! For the love of God!" he says, trying to roll her off of him. "Feed on him," the portrait shouts. "Leave some for me." "This isn't real." "But you can feel them, can't you? You can feel them digging into you with their lovely teeth, sucking the life essence from you. You can feel that, can't you, Joseph?" "No!" he screamed, but he could. He could feel the strength leaving his body. As he was trying to force Stephanie's face away from his neck, he could see the portrait drop from the door and begin to slide its way towards him. "Fuck," he struggles. "Stephanie, you need to wake up. That's not your mother. None of these things are real." "We're real, Joseph," the portrait hisses, "and we're gonna feed on you for a long, long time." He pivots just before the starfish on Stephanie's face can burrow into his neck. He looks into the pleading eyes and tries with great effort to roll away from her. The image of her mother has crawled out of the portrait, and her face has turned into a gaping, fang-filled hole of hunger. Some of the starfish on Stephanie drop off her with little shrieks and glom onto him. Instantly, they begin to dig into his flesh. Again, he feels himself being drained. "How is this happening?" he cries out. He feels the mother latch onto his ankle, and then the giant sucker head chomps down on his calf. He screams out and tries kicking her away. "Oh," the captain says. "Sorry to see you go, Joe. You were my favorite guest at the captain's place." Stephanie crawls onto Joe, and the starfish on her face bites down into his chest. "Ah, fuck, kid," he says with a bit of disappointment in his voice. "I don't think I'm going to be able to help you unless you help me." He can feel more of the starfish drop from Stephanie's body and land on him, their tiny suckers attaching to him, and then the little burrowing mouths chewing holes into him and the draining. The mother thing taking larger and considerably more painful gulps from him. Joe wore soft canvas sneakers, and his kicks to the mother's head were doing nothing. His kicks and his struggles were getting weaker as more of himself was being drained. "Grandfather Clock," Captain Kangaroo says, "do you know what time it is?" "I sure do, Captain," the happy old Grandfather Clock puppet announces. "It's time to die." "It sure is, boys and girls. It sure is." Joe grabbed the starfish on Stephanie's face by one of its legs. He pinched it hard between his index finger and thumb. It bit deeper into him, making him wince. "This He takes a deep breath. Is not real! It lets go of him and screeches at him, trying to free its pink pulsating leg. He pulls at it harder and its suckers begin to yield. You're not real! The mother releases his calf with a wet popping sound. Yes, she says with a mouthful of flesh and blood. Yes, we are! Joe uses this moment to connect his free heel to drive it into the face of the mother thing. The sole of his shoe catches on some of her jagged teeth and rips them from the roots. The mother crumples and screams in pain. He pulls the thing attached to Stephanie's face and rolls his entire body, ripping it from her. It squeals and writhes in his fist. Look at this, Stephanie, he yells. It's not real. With her face free but bloodied, she yells back, Not real! The pink starfish turns black and liquefies into a lumpy blob of black ichor. That's it. None of this is real. Do you get... Diana's voice is slowing down as if the record player is changing speed. What you're hoping for? When you look behind you, there's no open door. What are you hoping for? Do you know? When the record player stopped, the starfish began to drop and scream on the ground. Their leathery flesh turns black and melts into thick black puddles. Stop this! The mother screamed. I will have this! Stephanie! Come to me now! Stephanie looked at Joe and then lowered her head to sit next to her mom. She's not your mother, Steph, Joe said calmly. Deep down you know that's not your mother. Steph stopped and looked at her mother and began to mistrust what she was seeing. The shape began to shift as if things were rearranging themselves under her mother's skin. Steffi, honey, she said softly, of course I'm your mama. You're not going to trust some strange man over your mother, are you? She glanced over at Joe. You're the only one that can decide this, kid. Joe spoke. His wounds were beginning to heal. Steph, come here, please. Don't worry me so much. Mom? Stephanie says, reaching her tiny hands towards her. Yes, baby, it's me. The gaping mouth was gone, and her mother's face replaced it, still shifting in parts of her face. No, Steph said quietly. No, it's not. Steffi, don't do this to your mother, honey. You're not my mom. Her mother's skin shimmered. Yes, I am. Now come here to me before I get angry. Get angry then. Her mother shifted back to the gaping maw and hissed. I will feed on you. I will feed on the both of you. Joe jumped and tackled Stephanie, and they both rolled out of the way of her mother's grasp. Stephanie pulled the record off the record player and tossed the disc like a frisbee. It sailed through the air and lodged itself halfway through her mother's neck, almost completely beheading her. The thing that had taken the shape of her mother gagged, spitting gobbets of black and crimson all over the room. It clawed at the record and eventually pooled into a dark clump of dark gray ash. You all right, kid? Joe said, putting his arm around her. I think so, she said quietly. You got some fucked up things going on in that noggin of yours. She only sat there and shrugged her shoulders. Okay, let's get out of here. I have the feeling the house is going to start shaking. As if on cue, the room began to crumble. They ran out as the wall closed around the hole that was once a doorway. The clipboard that was nailed beside the door fell to the floor with a plap, and the nail with a tink. The floor beneath them began to disintegrate, and they fell into the blackness of the sublevels. Joe hit solid ground, knocking the wind from him. Steph! Joe says after gaining his breath back. Stephanie, where are you? No answer, only depthless shadow. Stephanie jumped in bed. Her eyes flicked open, and she found herself in a hospital room. She gasped and inhaled the sterile air coming in from the mask on her face. Jesus, Jenny on a crutch, her mother, who was sitting beside her bed. You scared the shit out of me. Mom, she says, panting. Is that really you? Of course it's me, honey. Who did you expect I was? She reaches for Stephanie's arm, and her daughter pulls it away like a snapping a whip. Steffi, her mother said with a hurt look on her face. What's gotten into you? You've had us all worried sick. Where's Dad? Ugh, God, why do you care where... I want Dad. Well, your father died. What? Steph, you've been out a long time. 6 years, baby. Your father got sick. Stephanie began to cry. No, not Daddy. I'm sorry, Steph. I tried. We all tried to wake you up. This is so awful. Oh, Daddy. Stephanie slid out of bed and got up on wobbly legs, almost falling onto the floor. She made her way to the mirror, to the small mirror hanging above the sink, to catch a glimpse of her 14-year-old self. Tears rained down her face. She punched the mirror, and it spiderwebbed into splintered glass. Stephanie, her mother shouted, I know you've been through a lot, but behave yourself. Shut up, Mother, Stephanie said between sobs. Well, I said shut up. She looked around her room, and different paintings of starfish were hanging about. She pulled each one off the wall and smashed them to the ground. Her mother ran out of the room, and orderlies and nurses rushed in, trying to restrain her. She hadn't the strength to fight him off. She felt a sharp prick that made her think of something biting her. She slowly lost the fight in herself and fell into the orderly's arms. The sedative should keep her up for a while, the nurse said, while they laid her back into bed. It sounded like a while. Ironic, her mom spoke. She'd been in a coma for 6 years, and when she wakes up, we end up having to put her out again. There were no hungry starfish this time in Stephanie's sleep. No Captain Kangaroo. No murderous portrait of her mother. There was only darkness. The House of Night Terrors almost had this so-called savior. It tasted him and grew from his nectar. But this time, not only had he freed one of his lambs, but he also freed the conduit of all lambs. She was a direct connection to the land of lucidity, a bridge to send forth its progeny, and she was gone. It had tasted his power. Oh, how it had tasted his power, like milk and honey. Did he know how much raw power and energy crackled through him? Perhaps not. He was just another dreamer, wasn't he? Blindly walking through the darkest domain of Nod, not knowing what morsel, dare say, banquet of delectable delights he carried around. It would have him. He will replace the conduit he robbed from it. He will spend an infinity of an agony feeding it and its children. Yes. Oh, yes. The house rumbled with anticipation. The house will control his path, right into its jaws. House is getting pissed off a little bit. A little bit. Somewhere in the darkness, there was a faint cry of a baby, and within that cry was the hint of a man's voice arguing with a female. I don't know if I like the sound of that, Joe said to himself. He followed the sound of the infant's cry, and he ran into something soft and velvety. He panicked at first, thinking this was some new horror trying to attack him, until he came out onto the other side, which opened into a large room dimly lit with candles. As he got closer, the room was surrounded with crimson-colored curtains. Outside the circle of candles, there were a circle of semi-nude women dressed in nothing but cloaks. In the center was a man kneeling before a woman with the same type of cloak. She was holding the infant. A fat white man stood between them. The woman holding the baby raised her hand, which had long blades on the end of them, and to Joe's horror, she swatted at the baby. Blood spattered outside the swaddling cloth. Both child and infant cried out. "Oh, fuck this shit," Joe said, and ran through the line of women. Simultaneously, Joe grabbed the baby and knocked the woman into one of the candelabras, and she lit on fire as she fell to the ground. The other women hissed and made their way into the circle. "Is this your baby?" Joe asked the man who was still on his knees. "Yes." The man, who seemed to be in some sort of shock, said, "What are you doing?" "Saving your kid's life. Now take it." Joe gave the baby to its father and grabbed one of the candlesticks and used it to keep the other women at bay. Is there a way out of here?" Joe asked. "There's no way out of here, Joe." "There's no way out of here, Joe," the fat man with a hint of Cajun on his tongue. "The fuck are you talking about?" "The name's Branson Mulcahy. You cannot undo what has already been done." "Do you know what he's talking about?" Joe asked the father. "I signed a contract," the father said sadly. "I have to honor it." "What?" The woman, who was on fire, cast off her burning cloak and stood up. Her eyes were red with fury, her teeth showed in a snarl, and she brought her claw across his face. "Take him," she ordered. The women gathered around him and held him. The father knelt before her and raised his baby to her. Blood was dripping into his right eye. He could barely make out the woman bringing her fierce claw into the air again. "Please," the father said, "take me instead." "You can thank the interloper," the woman said. "I may have bargained with you before, but because of this insolence, you forfeit the life of your child." "If I may interrupt you for just Branson began to say with that smooth southern charm that made him one of the best attorneys in Louisiana. "You may not," she interrupted him and slashed his throat. The fat man gagged and dropped to his knees. He looked wide-eyed at the father as he tried fruitlessly to hold in the blood jetting from his throat, and then dropped to the stone floor with his face. "Please," the father begged. "I know my life isn't worth shit, but take everything. Take my record business, take all my contracts. Just let my daughter live." "This isn't real," Joe shouted, struggling from the grip the women had on him. "None of this is real." "Silence him," the woman ordered. They smothered his mouth with their hands. The woman dug her blades into the infant, cutting its cries in half. It gurgled its last struggle to cry for help, and then was silent. The father screamed and thrashed on the ground. "You did this!" The father turned towards Joe. His teeth were grit so hard they looked as if they may shatter. He stood up and began marching towards Joe, fist balled in a juggernaut rage. Joe tried to struggle his mouth free, but the hands didn't leave his face until the first punch connected into his nose. He could hear and feel the snap of his nose, and then blood began to spurt from his nostrils. Another haymaker connected with his cheek, and he could feel it crack. His lights were beginning to go out. The women let go of him, and he fell to the stone floor, feeling like his face was going to fall off. "You need," Joe said painfully, "to wake the fuck up." The man landed a kick to Joe's ribs, which knocked the wind from him and possibly cracked a rib. "Listen to me. Please." "Shut the fuck up, you interfering piece of shit," the man said, landing another kick. "None of this," Joe coughed a wad of blood onto the floor, "is real. You must wake up." The man put all his anger and strength into his final blow. It connected with Joe's head, and then there was blackness. "Someone's coming back." Joe's eyes flicked open. He was lying in a mockery of his apartment. It looked like his place, but it seemed as if the colors were fading from it. The smell was different. He tried to get up, but something had him fastened to the couch. As he tried to pull his head and arms from the couch, he noticed the fabric was meshed into his flesh. "What the fuck is this?" he said through a throbbing jaw. He could hear the jukebox of his bar pounding out some outlaw country song, but at some laborious, slow speed. "Someone's coming back." Who's saying that? Who indeed? It's you. Someone's coming back. You keep saying that, but here I am, alone, and what was up with that dude kicking my ass when I was trying to save him? Fuck, I feel like Conor McGregor took a few turns with me. None of this is real, Joe. You know that. It fucking feels real. You need to get up. It's draining you. What's draining me? The House of Pavor Nocturnus. It's feeding on your energy. On Grandma's energy. I can't fucking move. This thing's got me melted into the couch or something. Someone's returned. A knock came at his door. The doorknob jiggled and the knocking began again. Now what? Starfish again? The devil? Naked bitches? Let them in. Did you forget that I'm kind of stuck here? Let them in. Come in, Joe shouted from the couch. The door unlocked and a familiar face burst in. The face was a bit older now, maybe 15 years old if Joe was a betting man. Joe, the girl said with a smile on her face. Stephanie, he said, struggling to get up. Help me out here, kid. I'm stuck. It's not real, remember? Joe stopped struggling and closed his eyes. Come on, Joe. We got to get out of here. He opened his eyes again and slowly sat up. He was free. Jesus Christ, kid, he said, hugging her. What the fuck are you doing back? And how did you grow up so fast? When I woke up out of my coma, I was 14. Stephanie's face filled with sadness. Turns out my dad died while I was out. I got upset and they hit me with a sedative. How the hell did you find me? I don't know. It was dark at first. Then it got brighter and I was sitting on one of those bar stools downstairs. You didn't bring any of those starfish with you, did you? No. Listen, I think we gotta hurry. I don't know how long I can stay here. You shouldn't be here at all. You should be awake in your own life, not here. It's far too dangerous for you here. Evidently, someone needed to save you. Yeah, thanks, kid. Joe stood up and immediately fell back onto the ground. His nose and his ribs were still broken. He moaned and gripped his midsection. Shit, he said, feeling his nose. I'm still broken. I'm not going to be much good at this. Didn't you tell me, she said, that nothing is real here? That this is all in our heads? Yeah, but... Joe closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He opened them again, tried to stand up. His ribs screamed at him and he went down on one knee. What the fuck? He spat out a wad of blood. I think we need to find the dreamer you were trying to awaken, she said. So he can finish kicking my ass? No, but I think if you can save them, wake them up, you might be able to heal. Ah, fuck, kid. Okay, let's go. Stephanie helped him up, tying a towel around his ribs. How's that? She asked. Good enough, he said, coughing and wincing. Joe's apartment is connected to the bar downstairs by a steep stairway of approximately 40 steps. How he ever traversed them during his drunk periods he didn't know, but now there was close to 150. They descended into a thick cloud of darkness. The first dozen or so steps, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. By the time they had reached the 100th step, they were both in pitch blackness, and goose flesh stood out on their arms. Shivering made his ribs hurt, but they pressed on. Towards the bottom, they bumped into that thick crimson curtain, its fabric heavy as it had absorbed all the dampness of the lower level. When they got through the curtains, they were in a small shop. The man who had kicked Joe around was standing before the same woman who was cutting up his baby. He looked younger now, and his clothing was more street. He had long hair with a bolero hat atop his black mane. The woman looked like your stereotypical psychic, draped in multicolored scarves as if she were trying her hardest to look like Stevie Nicks. Between them was an 11 by 7 sheet of paper. The woman held a pin over his open hand. "Stop," Joe said. The man turned without dropping his hand. The woman glared at him, eyes with a faint glow of red. "Bro," the man said, "you look like shit. Step away from that woman." "You have the nerve to come in here with her?" the woman said, glaring at Stephanie. "You know these people?" the man asked the woman. "Never mind them." She grabbed his still outstretched hand. "Give me your finger." "Hey, let go!" The woman had an iron grip, and she drew back the pin, ready to jab it into his finger. Stephanie looked around for something to throw and found a small human skull carved out of a chunk of obsidian. It sailed through the air and struck the woman in the forehead. She cried out, falling backwards into the curtains behind her. "That was a little harsh," the man said to Stephanie. Joe grabbed the man by the arm and pulled him away from the woman on the ground. "Nice shot, kid," Joe said. "Now let's get him out of here." "I'm not going fucking anywhere," the man protested. "I don't even know who the fuck you are." "Look, dude, I'm in no shape to fight about this right now, and I won't be able to fight her when she gets up. I'll explain everything when we get out of here, okay?" "Joe," Stephanie said, sounding alarmed, "she's getting back up." They tried to exit through the door, but it was somehow locked as if it were part of the wall. Joe searched the curtains to find the way they came in, but it was just a solid wall behind them. "I have had enough of this interference," the woman said, getting up, the scarves flapping in winds that seemed to blow from nowhere. Her eyes were blazing red now, smoldering with bright molten light. "Madame Afalba," the man said with eyes wide, "what's going on?" "Silence, Alexander Profetti," she spat. "I'll deal with you in a moment." She motioned her hand, and Alex sailed into the far wall and dropped to the ground. "As for you," she said to Joe and Stephanie, "you haven't the strength to fight me. I will not allow you to take what is mine again, and I will have you both entrapped in my cocoons again, to feed on you until your pathetic little souls are all dried up." She clenched her fist at Joe, and he immediately began to feel the pressure on his rib cage. The bones were beginning to snap, and he feared they would puncture a lung. Stephanie grabbed another tiny skull carved from some stone she didn't recognize, and when she hauled her arm back to launch it, she phased out and the stone skull dropped to the ground. And then she phased back again. "Oh, shit," she said, feeling her chest and legs. "I think the sedative's wearing off. I could be checking out of here, Joe." "Good," Joe struggled to say. He felt as if he were trapped in the coils of a constrictor. Every breath he let out, he could not refill his lungs. "You need to get out of here, kid." "I'm staying as long as I can." She turned to Alex on the floor. "Get up. Can't you see this isn't real? She's not Afalba. She's something else. She's trying to trick you." "Not real?" Alex said groggily. No, this thing is trying to keep us all asleep so it can feed on our nightmares. You must wake up. She's telling you the truth, Joe said, losing consciousness. I helped her wake up, and now I'm trying to help you. Felba squeezed her fist even tighter, and Joe cried out. You're not real, Alex shouted at her. You're a phony like everyone else in this fucking business. A fucking fake. The witch felt Joe beginning to heal beneath her grasp. Stop this, she screamed. I own you. Alex picked up the skull Stephanie had dropped and chucked it in the woman's face. The thing that had taken the shape of Madame Felba screamed with rage as the skull ricocheted off her face, breaking open the facade and realizing the glamour that boiled inside of her. No one owns me, bitch, Alex shouted. Just my wife. Warmth filled Joe's body, and he felt his bones move and mend within his chest. His nose cracked and corrected itself. A rope of blood dripped from his nostrils, and then he felt his strength return. Joe! Stephanie reached for him. I'm going! I'm sorry! She was flickering in and out. It's okay, Steph, he said to her. Thanks for having my back. I hope things improve for you out there. She began to say something, but vanished before a syllable could be heard. Dude, Alex said, siding next to him. Before them, the Falba thing was shedding its mask, and long red wisps of tendrils began squirming in front of it, snapping at the air around them like whips. I can help you, Joe said, but you need to end this. This is your nightmare. You control this. The molten tendrils snaked their way into Alex's skin and began to burrow into him. He screeched out in pain. Alex, Joe shouted, remember, none of this is real. It's using your thoughts against you. This is the only way it can have control over you. Alex closed his eyes, trying to breathe in deep as the tendrils wormed their furious way through his body. None of this, he said to himself, is real. The heat subsided, and he thought he felt the tendrils begin to withdraw a little. Oh, but it is real, Alexander Profetti, it cooed. You're ensnared, and there's no escape from me. None. The tendrils began slithering inside him again, filling his lungs and his guts. Joe spied an old-looking sword hanging on the wall. It looked like something you'd buy at a Renaissance fair, but it would have to do. He stabbed it directly into the face. The tendrils snapped back, and the thing lost its blazing red color and darkened into an ashy gray color. Wake up, buddy, Joe said, slapping him on the back. Just wake the fuck up. Alex turned towards him, and Joe smiled at him. Dude, Joe Rabbit punched him in the face. What the fuck? Alex awoke with his fist swinging. He narrowly misses Amanda's face. Watch it, slugger, she says next to him in bed. He looks around and realizes he's in the bedroom in their Minneapolis apartment. Baby? He says, and places his hands on her stomach. Must have been quite a nightmare. She places her own hands on his. Nightmare. Yeah, a nightmare. Jesus, it was so real. You're bleeding. What? Oh, damn. He could feel blood trickle from his nose with a slight ache at the bridge. Joe, that fucker. Who's Joe? She asked, tipping his head back with a tissue pinching his nose. This dude who punched me in the nose. Alex, honey, what are you talking about? In the dream. He punched me to wake me up. Still don't know who Joe is. Alex realizes how he sounds. I don't know. He showed up in this nightmare I was having. He was there to rescue me from this witch. She was cutting up our daughter. Our daughter? Witch? What the fuck, Alex? I know, we don't have a daughter. I had to sign some contract or something to be rich and famous, and I think. Oh, honey, you've been working hard to get your music career off the ground. It's probably eating away at your subconscious. Yeah, that's probably it. It's weird, though. A little. I need to hang up the music dreams, I think. Maybe go back to school to get my counseling degree. No, not that. The part about a daughter. Oh, yeah. I don't know where that came from. I'm not 100%, babe, but I've been late with my period. I took the home test. Wait, what? I'm fairly sure I'm pregnant. Bum, bum, bum. With every sleeper the interloper takes, the weaker it becomes. And he has the audacity to bring the girl back? The conduit? How did he do that? The house of night terrors trembled. Its walls were cracking, and the foundation began to wither like parched tree roots. It was beginning to lose control. It had him. Oh, how it had him. Dreaming deeply in its gossamer webbing, broken and nearly faithless. If it wasn't for the girl coming back, he would have fed on it for eons. When was the last time it feasted on a guardian, a savior, a Zabajichil? Then it would have had the girl. The girl was older now, but her imagination was still fresh and full of fear. Her mind was still 8 years old. She had already built a bridge during her time with it, a bridge that let loose the nightmare progeny it had birthed into the land of lucidity. It would do what it needed to do to keep the others. It would do what it needed to do to ensnare the interloper. Let him come. Let him try. But what if one of them comes back? Another tremor. What if they all come back? A room on its second floor deteriorated and crumbled through the first floor and disappeared into the blackness of the basement. It was a fluke. That's what it was. They couldn't return unless it brought them back. This interloper had no such power. Or did he? Doubt developed in the back of its consciousness, and floorboards began to ripple and weaken. Fuck, that felt good, Joe said, shaking the sting in his hand. The fucker deserved it, too. The storefront of Madame Falba LaRue had folded in on itself and became nothing but a crumbling wall of rotted wood. He was in a hallway again, and behind him came the glow of neon lights, buzzing and snapping with sparks. The sign, with some letters burnt out, read, Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Palace. I'm in 1985, he smiled to himself. He grabbed the door that was made of dim smoked glass. He expected to see the orange glow of this arcade/pizza parlor. Old arcade and midway games lined up with kids shouting and playing, some of the younger ones jumping into ball pits of multicolored plastic orbs, and skee-ball lanes lined up all along a wall. Those nightmarish animatronics playing some droning song played at half speed while their robotic mouths snapped like shark jaws. He paused. Oh, fuck, he thought to himself. I don't know if I can deal with that. You don't have a choice, Joseph. It was his grandma's voice. You must help this girl. Grandma? He said to himself. Where have you been? With you. I am always with you. Now open the door. I swear to God, Grandma, if there's some even more nightmares version of those fucking puppets in there. Watch that mouth, Joseph. Whatever is in there, you are stronger than that. Now get your shit ass in there. Joe chuckled as he had never heard his grandmother swear before. When he opened the door, there was no arcade, no animatronic horrors, not even the scent of pizza. There were children, but they were in pieces, and they were strewn about a wooden deck in coagulating puddles of blood and entrails. The smell of rotten vegetation and copper hung in the air. "Oh, fuck," he said beneath his breath. Instead of the gnarly, fake fur of Chuck E. Cheese, the mouse, and his anthropomorphic robot band, there were human-shaped wolves, growling and snarling, hunched over the remains of children, emitting sick, wet sounds of chewing meat and crunching through bones. One such wolf had a torn banner draped around her shoulders that read, "Happy Birthday, Linda." She was chewing upon what looked like the lower half of some kid's leg. A blood-stained Nike hung on its foot. "Grandma," Joe whispered, "I don't know about this one." "You can do this, grandson. Remember who you are. Remember why you're here." "Is she the dreamer?" "Yes. I think I'd rather deal with the Terminator robots than this." "That's your fear talking. You dwell within the rules of her dreams and her fears. Wake her up, and this place will have no power over you." "Wake up a goddamn werewolf? Fuck me. You need soap for that mouth." "Linda," he said hesitantly. The wolf was ripping a ligament from the tibia. Her ears perked up at the mention of her name. The other wolves stopped eating and turned their attention to Joe. Hey everyone," he said. "Happy birthday, Linda." Her lips peeled back to expose her canines that were gleaming with blood and saliva. She growled at him. The other wolf stood up and started towards him. She roared, and they stopped. Joe was trembling, but stood his ground. "Linda," he said, trying not to stutter, "you need to wake up. This is all a really bad dream." The wolves spoke to one another in a chorus of growls and barks. They looked as if they were ready to tear him apart, but stood still, waiting for Linda's actions. "I know you probably want to tear me apart right now. Maybe you even want to eat me." She howled in agreement. "But this isn't the real you. This is just a nightmare." Something moved under her skin, and the fur on her body began to twitch, and some of it disappeared. Her face was nearly human again. Nightmare?" she whispered. Joe could see the innocent brown eyes gazing at him. They were both hungry and confused. "Yes, kiddo, a nightmare." "But I ate." Her skin shifted again, and she was becoming a wolf again. "In your dream, Linda, but not in real life." She snarled again and looked around horrified. She was making her way back to humanity again. She looked at the other wolves around her. "Don't know what..." One of the bigger wolves pushed her out of the way, and he charged at Joe with claws extended and fangs bared. Before Joe could pivot out of the way, the wolf caught him, digging all 5 of its claws deep into his shoulders. He tried to struggle his way free, but the wolf dug his canines into his neck and ripped a large chunk from him. Blood gushed from the wound like a sprinkler. "This is not real, Joseph. Keep that in your head." Joe closed his eyes, trying to close off the wound with his hand, remembering that if this was real, he would be a dead man right now. "You see?" He tried to speak without gurgling in his own blood. "This is not real." The large wolf bit down on his bicep and tore it off his bone in stringy gobbets of bloody meat. "It's not real." Joe was beginning to succumb to the wounds. Black spots began flickering like obsidian stars in his peripheral. "Fight this, grandson, for her sake as well as yours." Linda was phasing back and forth from wolf to human again. "Please," Joe uttered. "Please, Linda. You have to trust me." Linda had patches of fur, but she was nearly human now. Her brown eyes filled with tears and blood clotted around her mouth. Joe's wounds were healing, and his strength was coming back. The large male wolf lifted its right claws and prepared to strike Joe in the face. "Alpha Sibley!" Linda yelled. "You are a lie!" The giant wolf cringed as if it had been struck and yelped. "Atta girl," Joe said as the last of his wounds stopped bleeding and began closing. "This is all a lie." Two other wolves stepped forward, snarling and growling, ready to join Alpha Sibley in Joe's slaughter. "Mother!" Linda shouted. "Father! Stop this right now!" They obeyed her and began to nip at Joe. "They're not your parents, Linda," he said calmly as they attempted to break his skin. "Stop this!" "Yes, child," Alpha Sibley said. "Give in to that rage. Become one with it. Relish in it." "No!" Linda's fur began to thicken and her canines were coming in. She felt her bones begin to move inside her. "Yes, this is who you are. This is your family. Don't take the side of some stranger. You are one of us. The Lugaroo is your heritage." "That's not true." Her parents' fangs began to break the skin on Joe's arms. "You're losing her," his grandma said. "Bring her back." "Linda," he shouted desperately, "for the love of God, wake up!" In full wolf mode, she howled up towards the sky. The moon was full, and a dark pumpkin orange. The rest of the pack began to howl with her. Alpha Sibley gave Joe a knowing smile, his red eyes sparkling at him as Linda's parents began to tear away Joe's skin. One of the long metal poles that had recently held the birthday banner for Linda becoming sat opposite its mate. Linda had broken the pole with her muscled arm. She growled at her parents and Alpha Sibley. "What are you doing?" Alpha Sibley looked at her. She bent the pole so that the jagged edge was directed at her chest. "Linda!" Joe screamed out. "Don't do it!" Her parents stopped biting at Joe, and they joined Alpha Sibley in running at Linda. Just before they reached her, she gazed at Joe with saddened eyes, as if they were trying to say, "Thank you." And she plunged herself into the pole. It jabbed deep into her canine chest, crunching through the sternum and into the heart. Her parents fell into heaps of black goo while Alpha Sibley howled and fell into a pile of ash. "Grandma," Joe uttered, his throat choking with tears. She ended this, my grandson." "Then is she?" "Sadly, yes." The heart monitor flatlined, a long, unrelenting beep that didn't end until the nurse powered it off. "Oh, my God, no!" Linda's mother yelled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No! My Linda!" her father grasped, her lifeless body in the hospital room. "My Linda!" "Code Blue!" the nurse shouts out into the hall. A team of nurses and doctors streamed in to the hospital room, trying to revive her to no avail. "Pastor!" Her mother falls into the arms of Pastor Sibley. "Oh, dear God, Pastor!" "She's in the arms of the Lord now," he says. "May Dara go find her and keep her." The medical team left the room. Only the doctor and the family remained. "Subject is deceased," the doctor announces. "September 4th, 1985. 18:16 hours. The room fills with howls joined by the doctor. "My condolences," the doctor says robotically. "It's sad that she never made it to her becoming." "The Lugaroo have lost one of the pack," the pastor said, and bowed his head. The cold wooden shingles fell like dead leaves in autumn. Its cohesion was falling apart. It did not see this coming. The sleeper ended its own life just as leave the nightmare. It couldn't take too many more losses, but the Savior felt it. It wore guilt like a cloak. It would use this against him. It would feed off that energy. The House of Pavor Nocturnus wasn't beaten yet. It still held its milk cows deep in the house, their fear feeding its heartbeat. I couldn't save her, Joe wept into his hands. He was sitting in one of the hallways with his back leaning on one of the rotted walls. The house was shifting and seemed to be routing its strength into the other parts of the house, where the sleepers lay. It's feeding on your tears, Joseph, his grandmother said. All negative energy is like milk and honey to this thing. I can't help it. She couldn't have been any older than 12. Let your grief and your guilt be your resolve, not your weakness, my dear. What happens to these people when they wake up? Some wake up from comas, some wake up just as anyone else does from a night's sleep. That Stephanie girl, she said she was in a coma. Then when she was sedated, she ended up back here, but she was older. Time moves differently here in the land of Nod than it does in the land of lucidity. It is not such a linear thing as most believe. It happens in moments, not increments. Do they die when they die in here? Yes. Guilt covered him in a wet woolen blanket, soaking him to his core. This is bullshit. It is what it is, grandson. She had the free will to end herself like she did. That was her way out. If I would have tried harder. You did not force her hand, Joseph. It is not you running the abattoir of fear. You can only do the best that you know how to do. Like I said, bullshit. We must hurry. The house is collapsing. Do you feel it? Yes. If you are not able to get the rest out of this, they and you may be lost forever. Grandma, I don't know if I can do this anymore. You must. This is your destiny. It can be painful, but your shoulders are broad, and you can bear this weight. Now stand up. Joe cleaned his face with the back of his hands. Stand up. I'm trying. There is no try. There is either do or do not. Wait a minute, you got that from Star Wars. His grandmother chuckled. Then get up, young Padawan. Embrace your grief. Hold on to your guilt and save those people. You are Zavichel. You are a guardian. You are savior. Joe stood up. He brushed the dust and pieces of plaster and wood from his shoulders. The house groaned and the floor cracked and splintered. Okay, he said. Let's do this. He turned the corridor, and the hallway before him seemed to breathe and quiver. The walls and floor seemed to be made of living, breathing flesh. What in the hell is this shit? He said. He laid one careful foot down, and it squished and sank into the flesh-like mud. The walls rippled, and the floor jiggled like gelatin. As he approached the set of double metal doors, he reached out to push them open, but before he did, a young boy of about 17 crashed through them, landing solidly on the opposite wall, and slid down. Hey, kid, Joe said, are you all right? The boy got up onto his feet and ran down the hallway. Hey, Joe shouted, come back. Go after him. The hallway was solid again, this time with a linoleum floor and cement walls. There were what looked like students in the halls, dressed in uniforms, some in green and some in red. He sprinted through the crowd of kids, catching sight of the boy turning and going down another hallway. God damn it, Joe gasped. I am not a runner. When he turned the corner, he saw the kid go into a doorway. He opened the door, and there was a classroom. The boy sat in the far row, fourth desk back. The teacher was a tall man with salt and pepper hair. He had a runner's build, but his face and arms looked different, covered in flesh like that of the hallway he had just first walked onto. His face was puffy like the old Cabbage Patch dolls his sister used to play with. two beady black eyes peeking from folds of that greasy flesh. "Mr. Salinsky," the teacher said through its tiny mouth, "please take your seat." Joe hesitated, and the entire class was looking at him, including the boy he was following. Okay. The only open desk was behind the boy. In the front of the classroom sat what looked like a widescreen smartboard. "Hey, kid," Joe whispers to the boy. "What class is this?" The boy turned around and looked at him suspiciously. "How the hell did you get away without a uniform?" the boy said. "Uniform?" "Yeah, we're either red or green. Some of us are blue." I forgot it at home?" "Yeah, I'm not buying it. You should have been stopped by staff. How did you get this far?" "What kind of school is this, and what's up with the teach?" "Mr. Kellerman," this teacher interrupted their conversation, "if you and Mr. Salinsky have something to share with the class." "Sorry," the kid known as Kellerman said, and turned around. On the smart screen, images of people whose skin was red were eating what looked like other human beings. The screams were amplified. "The virus," said the narrator, "has infected over 75% of the world's population." Now an image of cells seen through a slide and enlarged was being shown. The different cells seemed to be merging with one another. "Because of the hard work put forth by our world governments and their team of virologists, we have developed a way to combat the virus and improve our lives exponentially." The screen switches to a scene showing a line of humans standing before a wall seemingly made of human flesh. "The new flesh has been proven to increase our immunity against not only this virus, but of every known disease known on the planet." The people walk single file into the wall of flesh and are completely engulfed into a flesh cocoon. "What the fuck?" Joe gasps. "This simple procedure," the narrator continues, "has helped humanity recover from an extinction event. Those that have taken the new flesh have become productive members of society." A scene of new flesh humans going about their day in a gated community appears on the screen. "Unfortunately, the new flesh cannot graft onto our original flesh unless we're willing to accept it. This is why we have developed the re-education centers." Now a pleasant scene of classrooms of children and young adults. They are all dressed in uniforms and seem to be enjoying their re-education. "Dude," Joe stands up, "this is some fucked up shit." "Sit down, Joseph," the teacher orders, "or I'll call the chaperones to escort you out." "Call them. None of this is real. All of this is in this kid's head." The boy looks at him with wide eyes. "What?" the boy asks. "Ignore him, Felix," the teacher says. "He's an interloper and a liar." "Felix?" Joe looks at him. "Yeah. Kick-ass name, man. How about you wake up and we get the fuck out of this nightmare?" "Nightmare?" "Yeah, this is all a nightmare, Felix. None of this is real. But Jesus Christ, you've got a doozy here. You've got a zombie apocalypse and a dystopian society all in one." "I'm calling the chaperones," the teacher says. "Call them, Dad." "Ho, ho, ho, that's your dad?" Joe asks. "Yeah." "Okay, throwing some dad issues into that mix." The classroom door opens, and two chaperones walk in. "The one on the right," Felix says, "is my mom." "Fuck, kid, you may need to see a therapist when you wake up." The chaperones are holding metal rods and are swinging them around like bow staffs. "Yeah, I'm really into anime too," Felix admits. "I suggest you wake up, buddy, before this gets too messy." "What am I going to wake up to?" "Yeah, I don't know, man. But it's got to be better than this." "You're 10, aren't you?" "I don't know what that means. Just wake up, okay?" The chaperones are closing in on them, while the other students clear the way for them. The metal poles are howling as they begin to swing at impossible speeds. The one Felix claims is his mom swings the rod down towards Felix's head as he attempts to wake up. There is a loud clang as Joe blocks it with his forearm. Felix pops his eyes open at the sound of his ears tickle a little from the vibration. He backs away behind Joe, who is blocking each blow the chaperones are throwing at him. "Don't worry about me," Joe said. "Just wake up and all this goes away." Felix looked at the images of his mom and his dad. "Don't leave us," his dad said. "Join us, Felix," his mom said. "We can be a family again." The memory of what they did to his sister flashed through his head. Anger rose in his cheeks. "I can't stand a world where my sister is killed and my parents act as if it was okay." Felix closes his eyes. "Wake up," his sister yells at the doorway. "If you're late, I'm late." Felix looked around his room and tearfully he looked at his sister. He springs out of bed and hugs her tightly. "What the hell, dork?" she protests. "I thought," Felix tries to remember, "I thought you were... Oh, never mind. I'm just happy to see you." Felix, a slow riser since Willa could remember, crushed her in his arms. "Okay, freak," she said. "Let go of me already. Come on. You're my ride to school. Go get ready." "Dad's making breakfast," Mom hollers from downstairs. "You got 15 minutes to get down here." Felix runs into the bathroom to scrub his teeth. He's happy to see it's his face and not some new flesh zombie. The nightmare is already beginning to dissipate into the ether of his brain. At the breakfast table, his family sits enjoying a quick breakfast. His dad made the best French toast, and it was always a battle between him and his sister as to who got the last slice. "Shh," his dad said, using the remote to turn up the television. "Listen up. Has declared a state of emergency. The CDC in Atlanta and the World Health Organization have declared a pandemic due to the recent outbreaks happening in major cities across the globe. Reports have come in stating that the infected have become extremely violent and have begun attacking the healthy citizens. The viral outbreak is growing at a high rate, and most world leaders have asked people to stay indoors and lock up windows and all entryways. The National Guard and local emergency response departments have joined together to help combat this outbreak. Please stay tuned to this station for further updates." "So," Willa says with a smile, "no school?" "I'm going to need to run to town and grab some groceries and supplies," his dad spoke. "I don't know if that's a wise, John," his mom protested. "We've got enough food to last us for a while." "I've got to go." "Dad," Felix speaks up, "please don't go out there. Please?" "You guys don't understand me. Please, Dad." John puts his coat on and grabs the keys. "I'll be right back, kiddo." How easily that rat bastard took away its food. It was becoming weaker. It didn't even have the strength to hold on to this one. Would the next one be easier for this savior? Losing the other one, the one that believed in werewolves, was hard, but it was satisfied with the child's suicide. It fed on the interloper's grief. It was keeping it alive. But the others, would he be able to convince them so easily? Would this just get easier for him to take and take and take? Perhaps not. This next one was lost in a hallucination. The dreamer was riddled with guilt. It delighted in the man's infinite loop, each illusion salting the heavy burdens he carried around. The Savior will fail, and with that, the House of Pavor Nocturnus will have him as a meal, restored to its power, with his... Oh, how delicious this is going to be. When Felix left, the scene around him exploded in dark ash. "This is getting easier, Grandma," Joe whispers. "Don't get cocky, Joseph," Grandma replied. This house, it is a trickster. I feel it may be luring you into something more dangerous. Keep your wits about you. Okay? Yes, Grandma. Okay, and I lost my place. Okay, there we go. Let's go back. Keep your wits about you. Humbled, Joe begins to walk through the darkness of the house. Soon a hallway appears, and it looks like an apartment building, one that seems familiar. None of the doors have readable numbers on them. They are jumbled characters until he comes to apartment 10. I think I know who this is, Joe whispers. Use caution, grandson, Grandma warns. The House of Pavor Nocturnus will use anything against you. It grows desperate now. I can feel it. Joe knocks on the door. Dean? He says, to no answer. Dean, open up. It's Joe. I don't think the dreamer is here. Joe opens the door and peeks his head in. The apartment is dimly lit. A table sits near the window on the far side. On it sits a plastic baggie with what looks like a purple mushroom. There is a small, round glass ashtray with a Marlboro light smoldering in it. An oil painting, not a print but an original, is propped up against the wall. The painting shows golden sand dunes surrounding an oasis. There is a lion and a girl almost hidden in those tiny jungle. The night sky is filled with stars, and some of those stars look like sea turtles. Dean? Joe repeats. Are you up? Stacy? Suddenly, there's a distant sound like static from a television left on at high volume. Then sparks emitting from rainbow-colored light begin exploding in the air in front of Joe. What the fuck is this? Joe said. Such language, Joseph, Grandma snaps. If your mother was still alive. But she isn't. There's a shape that begins forming in the middle of the colorful electricity, like that of a man kneeling in defeat. No! The shape is screaming. Then a loud pop snaps in the air, hurting Joe's ears, and the colors are gone, and his friend Dean Loner lay in the middle of the floor in designer underwear. He is covered in lacerations, blood, and sweat. Dean, what the fuck, man? Joe hunches down to help his friend up. Joe? Dean answers, dazed. Come on, buddy. You gotta get up. And I need to get you out of here. I can't leave. This is a nightmare, bro. None of this is real. Dean begins to laugh. It starts out as a small chuckle and then gradually makes its way to maniacal. Joe slaps him hard across the face. Joe realizes the deadness in his eyes. Who are we to say what reality is, man? Dean says with an emotionalist smile on his face. Who? I don't know what you're on, buddy, but we gotta go. Go? Oh, man, we do. We do need to go. I need to show you. What are you talking about? Dean walks over to the table and grabs the purple mushroom and comes back. Eat this, Dean says. Nah, bro. Joe turns his head. Come on, let's wake up and we can talk about it on the other side, okay? Why won't any of you motherfuckers help me? Easy now. Joe noticed that Dean was becoming increasingly irritated. You're supposed to be my friend, Joe. I am. You're supposed to be my brother. I am. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to wake you out of this fucking nightmare. Whatever's here is feeding on you. Dude, I brought Stacy over there, and she gets killed every time. Every motherfucking time. No matter what I do, she fucking gets attacked by that fucking lion. Jesus, fuck. Why won't you help me? Dean, listen to me. Take a deep breath and listen. Joe holds Dean's head in his hands so that they are looking into each other's eyes. Dean's are bloodshot, and his pupils almost take up the entire residency of his eyeballs. You and Stacy, Joe says slowly and calmly, you guys broke up. You broke up like almost a year ago. You didn't break up in the greatest way, but you broke it off. She went her way, and you went yours. Okay? Joe realized that Dean may have been staring at him, but he was somewhere else. The madness was on a loop in his head, and he didn't want to come back. Just, Dean finally spoke up, holding the mushroom to Joe's mouth. Just try it. You'll see. Don't do it, grandson, Grandma spoke up. Something is not right about this. Maybe this is the only way I can help him, Joe whispers to his grandmother. Take it, Joe, Dean repeats, and see. Joe opens his mouth. Dean breaks the mushroom in half and inserts one into Joe's mouth and the other in his own. They both chew the spongy substance, and Dean guides him to the table. Look at the painting, Dean says. Think about your intention. Where are we going? What are we going to do there? I'm trying to save your ass, Joe mutters. Joe feels an ice pick puncture his forehead from somewhere inside his brain. A bright light consumes his eyes. Find it, Dean chants. Follow it. What's happening? The light explodes and a rainbow envelops both of them. He feels himself being pulled through a solid wall of air. It's not painful, but his flesh resists it. Tiny man brain brought his friend, a voice says. Misery loves company, as they say. They are floating in a sea made up of stars. Unknown constellations ripple with the movement of their arms and legs. Within these stars are what look like the biggest sea turtles Joe had ever seen in his life, swimming next to them. Welcome, tiny man brain and friend, one of the turtles say, to the grand illusion. Dean, Joe says with his mouth agape, seriously, man, what the fuck is going on here? Smart-ass fucking turtles, Dean says. Think they know everything. Everything? One of the turtles says. Goodness, not everything. We only observe. One cannot fathom everything in the universe. Come on, Joe. Fuck these guys. Fuck us? Another turtle inquires. Well, goo-goo-ga-choo. Tiny man brain wants to fornicate with us. Joe follows Dean, who is swimming away from the turtles. Zwavichel, the first turtle calls out. Your intentions are honorable, but you cannot rescue this one. I'm afraid this one has gone mad. Joe catches up to Dean, and they can see land ahead. They swim hard to make it to the beach. The sand is canary yellow, and Joe immediately feels a cold chill run up his spine thinking about starfish. Why did those turtles call you Zabichel? Dean asked, standing up. It's Polish, for savior, Joe says. This all makes sense then. How so? You're here to help me save Stacy. Seriously, man, you need to wake up. Come on, we have to hurry. I'm not sure if the lion got Stacy yet. They climb a large sand dune. The sand is too yellow, Joe thinks as they trudge up to what looks like a giant oasis. A thick jungle of palm trees sits off to the one side, and what looks like a walkway going around a small pond. She's up there, Dean points towards the outskirts of the palm trees. Dean? Stacy says from up the path. Hurry up, silly. Stacy! Dean shouts. Please, honey, come back over here. You wanted this trip, Dean. Come on. Please, stop. Joe is here. Joe hears a low growl echo from the depth of the jungle, like a gurgling sound with a feline purr. Oh, God, Dean says and begins to sprint towards Stacy. We're too late. Dean! Both Stacy and Joe shout. A gigantic lion, bigger than it has any business being, leaps out of the jungle and swats a large paw at Stacy, and she goes flying in a heap at Dean's feet. Its eyes are burning red, and its fangs glisten with hungry drool. "Dean!" Joe shouts. "Get the fuck out of there!" But Dean is face to face with the lion. It lashes out and cuts him and throws him. They wrestle, and the lion beats him around like a rag doll to the edge of the pond. Joe picks up one of the paver stones and comes from behind and bashes it in the skull. The lion roars and then falls on top of Dean. "Come on, man, get up," Joe offers his hand. He pulls his friend from underneath the dead cat. Dean is crying, but that same dead smile on his lips. "We have to do this again. We have to do this again," Dean proclaims. "What?" Joe gasps. "We were too late, but if we try again, maybe we can get here quicker, and we can ambush that fucking lion." "Dean, you must wake up. None of this is real. This is all just some weird-ass, funky shit your brain has come up with. Now come on, wake the fuck up." "Fuck you, Joe." Dean grabs Joe, catching him off guard, and holds him teetering above the pond. Below, a ridiculously large crocodile slithers through the water, awaiting its prize. Equally large piranha are schooling and snapping at the surface. "What are you doing, Dean?" Joe asks. "Fuck you. We'll keep doing this until we save her. You said you're a savior, then save her." "I'm here to save you, Dean. You can't save me, Joe. I'm already dead." With that, Dean lets go of him, and he falls backwards into the open jaws of the predators of the pond. Joe closes his eyes and awaits the inevitable, but it never comes. His body jerks and he's awake in Dean's apartment. "Oh, fuck this," Joe spits. "Fuck this shit." He walks over to the apartment door and it doesn't open. It seems to be locked. "What's the matter, Joseph?" It wasn't his grandmother's voice this time. It was a cold voice that seemed to raise chills into your bones. There seemed to be many voices all mixed into one. "Weren't you able to save your friend? Weren't you able to help him out?" It sounded as if it were smiling. "Such a pity. You can't force him, you know. He is here of his own free will." "Who the fuck are you?" Joe says. "I am your worst nightmare. I am the nightmare of your nightmares. I am the boogeyman in your closet, the face in your window. I am the noise in the basement. I am everything you fear, and I'll feed on it. I am the House of Pavor Nocturnus. I am the House of Night Terrors." "Wow. Did you rehearse that?" Joe says, clapping slowly. "The child who impaled herself, the little wolf girl. You still feel the sting of guilt for failing her, don't you?" That was you that did that. You forced her hand. It was the only way she knew how to escape you. "And you call yourself a savior?" "Fuck you. I can taste the tears you struggle to hold on to." "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said fuck you." "Oh, that anger, that sadness, that fear. So delicious." Joe began to feel himself get weak, as if the energy from him was being drained. "Not so tough anymore, are you, savior? Maybe you should sleep." "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" "Oh, I would love that. Just sleep, Joseph. Forget about saving anyone. You could even save the wolf girl. You definitely can't save your friend." "I won't sleep. Your stubbornness is arousing. Shut your eyes and sleep." Joe's eyelids were getting heavier. The energy he used to keep himself upright was being sapped from him, and his knees began to buckle. That's it. Give in. No sense fighting for those that didn't want your help. Just sleep. No, was all he could muster. The fight is going out of you now. You might as well give in. That same static began, like crushing gravel through an old telephone line. Flashes of light shadowed with prisms, and then a loud popping sound. "Dean!" Joe shouted. "Walk away from him, Joseph. He's mine. He doesn't want your help." I don't walk away from friends. Dean laid there for a moment. Joe walks over to him, and he is cold to the touch. He wonders if people have pulses in the land of Nod. Turns out, no one does. And at first he was saddened that his friend may be dead. "Joe?" Dean says groggily. "Hey, buddy." Joe sighs with some relief. "You okay?" "I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to drop you into the..." "No worries. This is all a dream, buddy. None of this is real. I'm not dead, and neither are you." Dean laughs and then coughs uncontrollably. I am dead," he says after the coughing fit subsides. "It doesn't matter if I wake up or stay asleep. You don't understand." "No, I don't. Those mushrooms, those fucking mushrooms, they took me in deep. I don't know if I can get out of this. I'm stuck in this loop." "That loop will stop you if you just wake up." No, it's in my head. It's part of me now. I can see that. I accept that." "Don't fucking accept it, bro. This isn't your life. You're processing something that happened a long time ago. Let it go and come back home." "Thanks for trying, man. But this is my purgatory." "You see, Joseph, he has given himself completely to me. There's nothing you can do to save him. Now, you are mine as well." "I don't buy that," Joe shouts. Dean curls into a ball and begins to fade in and out. "God damn it, Dean," Jones says, trying to grab his friend. "Stay with me." That static begins to crackle, and Dean's body is no longer solid. His body breaks down into particles of dust that slowly begin to drift away. "He's mine, Joseph. Every delectable iota of his being belongs to me." "Motherfucker." Joe attempts to hold on to his friend, and his shape crumbles into a pile of lifeless dust on the floor. "Looks as if you've failed your friend. How that must hurt." "Show yourself, asshole. You fucking coward. Come and face me head on." "You ape. Think brute force can do anything to me? You're stuck here inside this nightmare of nightmares. You are food." "I ain't nobody's food." "Is this how you grieve, Joseph? Anger, rage? It's beautiful, isn't it? All that energy poured into such wanton devastation." Joe began to feel guilt, rage, and anger. It made his fist ache. Yes. Let it go, Joseph. Feel it. Let it out. Your friend Dean was so fulfilling. But you, oh my yes, you are banquet. In that one rageful moment, thoughts of Linda killing herself and losing Dean peaked. And at that same moment, the house began to feed. He felt all those feelings being pulled from him, and he no longer had the strength to stand. "Stop this," he said, as his breath was leaving his lungs. "My, you have so much unreleased energy. I will feed on you for eons." The house began to rumble as its foundation was beginning to solidify again. Broken boards began to heal themselves. Joe realized he was losing. He crawled towards the apartment door. He felt like he was in a vacuum. When his hand touched the doorknob, he felt another presence was in the room with him. "Leaving so soon? Have you forgotten the face of your father?" "Where the fuck do you think you're going, asshole?" It was the voice of his stepfather. Joe turned to look at him. Hate immediately filled him up. "You," Joe spat. "Look at you, fucking lazy-ass, good-for-nothing stoner. Get the fuck away from me." His stepfather took off his belt and coiled one end around his fist. He began cracking it like a whip and struck him on the back. "Get the fuck up," his stepfather yelled. "Get the fuck up or I'll give you some of this. Give some of this to your mother." Joe stood up and grabbed the end of the leather belt in his own fist and used his free hand to lay a fist into his stepdad's cheek, tumbling him onto the floor. He tried to get up, but his fist was caught on the other end of the belt. Joe held on to his end and began drilling his stepfather multiple times in the face. "Eat shit, you fucking prick," Joe said. "You won't touch me or my mother again." "That's it. Let it all out. Kill him. Oh my, this is so tasty." Joe stopped. He stared down at what used to be his stepfather. His face was mutilated pulp of skull, muscle, and bloody teeth. His tongue flapping around in a gooey puddle of gore. "Why are you stopping? Give it to him again." "That's not my stepfather," Joe says calmly. "He's phony, like you and this whole house of shit." "The hate never goes away, Joseph. The grief and the hurt stays with you. Dean knew it. They all knew it. Open your eyes and give in, George." "No." Joe loosened his grip on the belt and backed away towards the door. The shape of his stepdad turned into a black pile of bubbling tar. "So, you're just gonna walk away from your friends?" "There was nothing else I could do," Joe says sadly. "You beat him down. This one is on you." "Doesn't that infuriate you? That I've taken your friend from you? That I've devoured him right in front of you?" "It does. But I can't do anything about it now. But I'll get you. I'm gonna save the rest of the dreamers here. And you'll be weak." "Don't walk away from me, Joseph." "This dream is over. You've finished it. See you on the next one." "Come back here. Don't you walk out that..." Joe closes the door calmly behind him. Somewhere in downtown Minneapolis, the light of dawn shines through a tattered blind in the window of apartment 10. Dust dances lazily in the sunbeam of a new day. There's a queen-size mattress as a body lies cold with sweat-stained sheets coiled about his limbs, as if he were struggling in a dream. Or perhaps it was a nightmare, so horrible his heart couldn't take it, and it beat one last time. His sky-blue eyes forever open, staring at something. The evidence of a teardrop dried on his cheek. "Loner!" came a loud knock on the door. "Loner, it's me, Subby!" Silence. Sebastian, his friend and supplier of all things mind-altering, opens the apartment door, making the dust move violently through the now waning sunbeam. The stench of stale cigarettes, sweat, and something like rotted vegetable matter assaults his nose. Dean? He repeats and walks over towards the mattress on the floor. Oh, shit. Dean. The house is getting smaller, Joseph. Joe hears his grandmother's voice, but he is lost in thought regarding his friend. They had both been in pool league together for 15 years. Dean was one of his first patrons at the bar that he had become friends with. They had the same taste in music and went to local concerts together whenever Joe had the chance to get away from the bar. Dean also booked a few of the local rock groups at Joe's bar. Joseph? I heard you, Grandma, he said, a little irritated. I understand your grief, but hide it deep for now. I feel the house is getting weaker, but it drained us. It still stands formidable against us. It will use your grief against you, as you have witnessed. I'm tired of this. I know, but you must go on. There are 2 more. And I don't think these will be easy. I feel none of this has been easy. I feel as if I've failed. I have lost plenty of battles over the years, Joseph. All of us have, guarding the gate of Nod. Really? Sadly, yes. Some of us have died trying to stop the monsters that come across. Are you telling me there are monsters walking the earth? That they come from here? Yes. This place is as much a reality as the land of lucidity. This is why we must guard things against these things. Like the dragon? Like the dragon. There are beautiful things here as well that are known to cross over, usually without consequence, but when evil crosses that threshold. So do we deal with these monsters when they cross over? Yes. There are those of us that do, but we are guardians of the burial. Others are born to be hunters. I'm not sure which is worse. Wear your position with pride, grandson. We are chosen. I will try. I've been very proud of you so far, except that there will be failures, but there will also be victories. Joe noticed that the house was getting smaller. The hallways were thinner and the ceiling lower. The decay of the house was waning, and though it was smaller, he could feel the strength in it too. Ahead there wasn't a doorway, but what looked like a puddle on the wall. It was perfectly round, and the water within it bubbled furiously. Steam wafted from its surface. The fuck is this? Joe said. Seriously, Joseph, that mouth of yours. You never spoke that way when I was alive. You died when I was like 10. Joe walked away slowly up the bubbling pool. Inside of it, he could see the ceiling of a house. Slatted boards with ceiling fan pointed right at him. His perspective was from the floor of some house. A hot tub inside of a house? Joe asked himself. Keep in mind the house is desperate now. It has fed enough on you and on your friend. It will have insurmountable power, and it will try anything to end this. Joe carefully fed his index finger into the puddle. The water was warm and strong, smelling of bleach. He reached his hand deeper into the puddle, and he could feel cool air on the other side. Careful, Joseph. There was a sharp pain, as if metallic teeth bore into the flesh of his wrist. He pulled his hand back quickly, and his wrist looked like it was chewed up through his radius to his ulna. Bits of raw, bloodied meat and skin protruded from the jagged wound. "Oh, fuck!" he said, grasping his wounded arm. "Oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck!" He sat on the floor, staring at the blood staining the waters of the opening. A large shadow passed over the puddle, and he shivered. He pulled off the sleeve from his hoodie and wrapped it around the gash. He then pulled the lace from the hood and tied that tightly around the sleeve. The blood stopped gushing out, but the pain throbbed like a rapid heartbeat. "What the fuck was that?" Joe shouted. "A nightmare, grandson. One that you must enter to save the dreamer inside." "God damn it. Not a good way to start this shit." Joe peeked into the pool and didn't see any giant, shadowy shape near. He slowly made his way through the water, and he came out into a hot tub that sat in the middle of a living room. He tried desperately not to splash water or make any noise as he crawled painfully onto the cement floor. There was a chilly draft that was blowing from an open door to his right. He could see it was winter, and large powdery flakes the size of quarters were blowing in from the outside. With his entire body soaked, it froze him, and he immediately began to shiver. Somewhere on the other side of the house he could hear a young girl screaming, almost drowned out by the roar of what he believed was a chainsaw. "Terrific," he moaned and looked around for a weapon. He found a fireplace poker leaning against the brick fireplace. He felt it in his numbing hands with some difficulty and swung it from side to side. "Freeze!" a voice ordered behind him. "Now what?" Joe asked himself. "Put your hands in the air or I'll put a bullet in you." Behind him was a police officer. His gun was drawn and the hammer was pulled back on the revolver. Joe put his hands up and the cop kicked him behind the knees and he dropped to the floor. "Dude," Joe protested, "I'm not the guy." The cop slapped handcuffs on him and squeezed them on tight. Joe howled in pain as the metal bit into his wound. "Fuck, man, look at my hand. He did this. The guy you're looking for did this to me." "Bullshit," the cop said, and then squeezed the button on his radio. "Dispatch, I got one in custody." Joe noticed the chainsaw had stopped. The girl was still screaming in some back room. "Lori!" the cop yelled. "Lori, this is the police. We're here to rescue you. Tell me where you are." The cop stood up and holstered his gun and began to listen to where the little girl's voice was coming from. "You idiot," Joe said. "He's still in the house. Draw your goddamn gun." "Are you working with an accomplice?" the cop said suspiciously, putting his hand on the butt of his service revolver. From the shadows, there was a spluttering sound of a small motor being pull-started. A small chug at first, and then it began to roar to life. The officer tried to draw his gun, but it was too late. The long, ripping blade of semi-chiseled chain dug into the midsection of the police officer, and within that reddish-brown spray of blood, steaming guts began to splat onto the ground at the cop's feet. The giant man pulled with some effort, and the saw was free, trailing intestines behind it. The man sauntered towards Joe, who was scrambling to sit upright and back away from the horrors before him. The man grabbed a hold of Joe and lifted him off the ground with ease, hanging him up by his cuffed hands on a set of deer antlers. It caused the cuffs to dig deeper into his wound, and he couldn't help but scream out in pain. The chainsaw began to rev, and the only thing Joe could do was kick his legs out. He only connected twice, but the brute wouldn't budge. Lori screamed from the kitchen, and the man stopped menacing Joe and cut the engine to the chainsaw. He looked towards the kitchen and then back at Joe again. He could tell the man was processing something in his brain, and then he turned and started walking towards the kitchen. "No!" Joe shouted. "Get the fuck away from her!" The man placed the chainsaw down by the hot tub and walked slowly into the kitchen. Joe could hear her screaming as the man got closer to her hiding place. There was splintering of wood, and then the hinges to the cupboard doors released with metallic pinging noises as they scattered to the floor. Lori's screams were shrill as the man grabbed her by the hair and lifted her out of the cupboard. Joe tried ignoring the pain and looked up as the man carried Lori's kicking body out into the living room. The man had a large butcher knife in his other hand. "This one is too terrified," the man said with a wet, croaking sound. "She will never wake up." Joe struggled with his arms, trying to free himself, but it only increased the pressure on his bleeding wound. "Let her go, you son of a bitch," Joe spat. "I'm gonna make you watch as I carve her up. I'll flay her flesh slowly so you can absorb every scream that emits from her tiny little lungs." The man poked the tip of the knife into her forehead, at her hairline, and began slicing downwards past the eyebrows, the bridge of the nose, and then her upper lip. Her screams turned into high-pitched gurgles as blood ran down her face. "Lori, honey, wake up," Joe pleaded. "This is all just a goddamn nightmare. Honest. Just wake up and he can't hurt you." The split in her face caused the clump of hair the man had in his hands to let go of the scalp, and Lori dropped like a sack onto the tiled floor surrounding the hot tub. "It's a dream, Lori," Joe said. "It can't hurt you." "Oh, but it can," the man said. He bent over to pick her up, and he made purchase of her shirt and began to lift her. When he pivoted towards Joe, the puddles around the tub had frozen from the winter chill blowing in through the glass patio door, and his heavy work boots slipped on the ice. He did a ridiculous dance that one would have laughed at if the situation weren't so horrible. After a few dance moves, the man fell into the hot tub and cracked his head onto the edge of the bubbling tub of water. He dropped Lori on the way down. The man was out cold, and Lori was curled into a painful fetal position, part of her face drooping in bloody flaps. "Lori," Joe said as calmly as he could, "this is a nightmare. None of this is real. I'm here to help you wake up. Can you do that for me, kiddo?" She was weeping, and her nose was intermittently sniffling up gobs of snot mixed with coagulated blood in her wounds. "You must wake up before that maniac wakes up. Come on, kid, you can do this." She looked over at Joe and began to slowly crawl towards him, looking several times at the maniac to make sure he was still out. "Don't waste your time with me. I'll be free as soon as you wake up. You must open your eyes." Lori wrapped her little arms around Joe's legs and struggled to lift Joe off the antlers without much progress. "Just wake up, Lori. That's all you need to do." There was a grunt behind her, and she froze. Slowly, on shivering bones, she turned her head to see the man begin to awaken. She panicked and started to climb up Joe's body. He screamed in pain, and both he and Lori dropped to the ground, and the antlers landed heavily into the back of Joe's head. They both scrambled backwards as the man began to level himself on all fours. A maniacal laugh uttered from him. "You'll never reason with her little 8-year-old brain, Joseph," he said. "She is beyond terrified. She is drowning in terror. She's seen more than any little child has any business seeing. She's lost." Grabbing the antlers with his hands behind his back, he scrambled to his feet. Lori had a death grip on his leg. "We need to run, Lori," Joe said. "Where do we run to?" She grabbed his hand and led him towards the door. They almost slipped on the frozen guts of the police officer. The wind seemed to try to stop them from running out into the open door into the blackness of the winter night. "You can't hide from me," the man said. "I know this place like the back of my hand." Lori led Joe to her snow fort. They slid in through the small entrance and into the main chamber. The icy walls glistened blue from the outside lights. Outside, the crunching of boots on powdery snow came closer. Little pigs, the man croaked. "I can feel you both. I can smell your fear. It won't take long now." Joe had hoped the falling snow was covering the blood trail his arm had left. Dang it. Joe had hoped the falling snow was covering the blood trail his left arm had left. Lori was snuggled tight next to him, shivering with fear and chill. Joe bent over and whispered into her ear. Many years ago, a race of humans were given the honor to guard a great bridge. On one side of the bridge was a place called the Land of Nod, and in that land were mysteries and creatures both wonderful and horrible. On the other side of the bridge was the Land of Lucidity. It was on that side that people would work, play, and dream. Those dreams would come to life in the Land of Nod. Sometimes the bad dreams, filled with monsters of every kind, would try to come across the bridge to the Land of Lucidity. They would be held back by people who were charged to protect the Land of Lucidity. "Are you one of those people?" Lori whispered back. "Yes, I am." She lifted her head and smiled at him. The folds of severed skin began to mend themselves. Tears were beginning to dry on her reddened cheeks. The handcuffs began to loosen on his wrists, and he could feel his wound begin to heal. "That's it," he said. "You're beginning to wake up." The cuffs fell to the icy floor of the snow for it, and Joe gripped the antlers tightly with his fists. He could see the area around his formerly hurt wrist, but needles and pins began to poke at where the cut was. Suddenly, the familiar roar of the chainsaw bellowed outside. The icy walls were beginning to rip open as the chain blades bit into them, scattering icy flakes like snow daintily floating in the air. Little pigs, let me in," the man shouted outside. Lori screamed and squeezed Joe tight around the neck. He pulled her off and set her as far away from the growing hole being ripped open on the wall as he could. "Just like the handcuffs, Lori," he shouted over the screaming motor. "The chainsaw is not real, okay? It's not real." The blade made its way through the wall. Joe maneuvered the antlers into the chain so that the man couldn't withdraw the saw. "She's mine," the man shouted outside. "You won't take any more from me." "Do you hear him?" Joe said to Lori. "He's scared. You are scaring him." The man began pounding on the walls with his fists. A crack turned into hundreds of cracks, turned into thousands of cracks. "I'll finish you both," the man growled, pounding harder and harder on the walls. "I'll feast on you both." "Close your eyes, Lori," Joe said. "Take a deep breath, and then, when you've sucked up all the air you can, let it all go, and open your eyes when you've breathed out all the air." Stop this right now. You belong to me, Lori. I'll cut you into little tiny bits, and I'll eat every delectable chunk of you. You can't escape." Lori closed her eyes. "Stop it!" She took a slow, steady breath, taking in the cold air to the point it was hurting her lungs a little. "I'm coming for you, Lori. If not tonight, I'll come back another night. You must sleep. I'll get you when you least expect it." Her eyes flickered. "Don't listen to his lies, Lori," Joe said. "You're almost there. You're almost home." She squeezed her eyes shut as tight as she could. Her lungs were beginning to hurt. "Stop this now!" As the ice walls began to cave in, Lori slowly opened her eyes. Maud Harris was just pouring a cup of coffee when her daughter screamed out of the bedroom. "What in God's green earth is that?" her husband, Frank, says from the newspaper in his hands. They both ran into their daughter's room. She was curled up in the corner of her bed, trembling with the blankets pulled up around her frightened eyes. "Lori, honey," Maud said, "what's wrong?" Lori couldn't form the words she needed. The only thing that could come out of her mouth was, "Joe." Frank looked at his wife and then at Lori. "Who's Joe?" he asked. "He came to save me," Lori finally said. He's still in there." "In where?" The Lori looked towards her window. "The fort." She jumped up from her bed and ran past her parents as they called after her. She stomped into her boots and ran to her snow fort. She flipped the towel aside and looked in. "Joe!" she shouted. "Joe, where are you?" Frank and Maud came out behind her. The inside of the fort was empty. She felt hands grab her ankles, and she immediately began screaming as her body was dragged out of the ice fort. Her father pulled her close to him as she kicked and screamed. "Lori," he gently scolded, "calm down, honey. You must have had a bad nightmare." "He's still in there," Lori said, staring at the entrance to her fort. "He's still in there with the bad man." "It was just a dream," her mother comforted. "You're safe now." "But Joe—" The only thing that came crashing through that ice wall was blackish soot. It invaded the snow fort like a dark cloud of dust. She opened her eyes. He said gratefully, "You saved her, Joseph, just like I knew you would." The fort was melting into a black-stained puddle of murk. Outside, the house was beginning to collapse on itself. "You better get in there and go out the way you came in." Joe crawled to his feet, amazed at how the strength came back into his arm that healed. The world around him was closing in on itself as if it were imploding. He made it to the shrinking home and slid on the black sludge that used to be the guts of the police officer. His feet kicked out, and he sloppily splashed into the hot tub and came out into the hallway he started from. There was only a tiny bit of hallway left. The rest was blackness. He was sure that within that blackness was just a void. The house was losing cohesion. Ahead of him was a thin path made of decaying wooded planks that didn't look safe enough to stand on. There were no more walls, just the inky blackness and this thin trail leading to an ominous green light ahead of him. "We aren't in the house anymore, are we?" he asked. "Yes and no. We stand on the edge of the bridge. I think this is the last of the dreamers, grandson. Be ready." "I don't like the look of that glow up ahead." "That is where the final sleeper is. We must go there." "This isn't going to be easy, is it?" "I'm afraid not. I remember. I am with you." "Thanks, Grandma." The boards snap and creak. Some of them break off and fall into nothingness. As he makes his way to the green light, it is like a pool of water. Green, almost gaseous light rippled from in front of him. He doesn't want to poke his hand in it, thinking that what happened last time. The mist is thick, and he cannot see what is at the other side of it, only knowing by intuition that the dreamer is on the other side. As Joe measures up the portal, a thin, pale hand reaches through, seeming to puncture into his chest. He can feel its long, ice-cold digits dig around inside of him. "What is this shit?" he utters. "The house! It's the house!" The hand pulls Joe through the green mass, and he is held aloft in what looks like a mortuary. On the other end of the hand, a very tall, thin man smiles at him with a mouth filled with too many teeth and eyes burning a red, hungry glow. There are 3 children standing frozen in fear on the other side of the room. "Why, look," the thin man says, "a fresh soul." Joe felt a tugging from the inside. The thin man had hold of one of the kids pinned to the ceiling. "What are you doing?" "Grandson, he's trying to pull me out. He's trying to sever our connection." "I think it's time," the thin man said, "to even the score." The thin man pulled with all his might, and the essence of his grandmother was beginning to detach from his own soul. "Nana!" he shouted. He could feel her struggling to hold on to him, to keep the connection, but her grip was slipping. "There you are," the thin man reveled. "Such a delectable morsel. I can feel your energies flow around you." The thin man tossed the kid to the side and used both hands to grasp Joe's grandmother. He felt so helpless as he didn't know how to help her tethered to him. "You'll have to let me go, Joseph." "No!" he shouted. "No! None of this is real." Her essence came out in a thick purple mist. smoky tendrils whipping around desperately to fight off the predator. With the purchase of his grandmother, the thin man tosses Joe into the far wall where he falls into a heap next to the frightened children. "All of this is real, Joseph," the thin man said. "This isn't your dream. You are merely a player, an interloper. For all the misery you have caused me, I aim to pay you back." "Let her go, you son of a bitch," Joe spat. "I'll kill you." "Kill me? Oh, that's rich. Kill me. Who do you think you are?" "I am Zavichel. I am Savior. I come like those who have come before me, like my grandmother." "This pathetic little soul is your dear grandmama." Joe looked over at the children. The older ones were frightened, but not as bad as the youngest, who cowered behind them. "You don't know." "I don't know which of you is the dreamer," he said. "But you must wake up. Please, for the sake of my grandmother, wake up." The children only looked at one another and then at Joe. "We're sorry, mister," the older girl said, "but none of us are dreaming right now. This is real." "No," Joe said, lowering his head. "This isn't happening. I can't lose her twice." The thin man licked his thin, waxy lips and bit into the mist, its tendrils quivering in pain. The man began to inhale as if draining the energy within the purple cloud. "Her essence is so intoxicating." The thin man took a deep breath of the fading cloud. "Her struggles make her taste so much sweeter." Joe realized there was only one thing to do. If none of the children knew they were dreaming, he would have to try and wake up each one. Immediately he thought it was the youngest, as she looked the most terrified. He grabbed her by the shoulders and brought his right hand back. "Sorry about this, kiddo," he said. He slapped her as hard as he could. Her little body flew back and splashed onto the floor in a black puddle of gore. "Kellyanne!" screamed the older girl. "What have you done to my sister?" the boy said, balling his fist up. "Gotta hope I'm right," Joe says to himself while he lifts his leg up and his foot springs out and connects with the boy's jaw. "Gary!" the older girl cries out and catches him before he hits the floor. "What have you done? What kind of monster are you?" "I figured it was you. You were the level-headed one. The other two were exaggerations of people you thought they were." "What are you talking about? These are my cousins." Take another look. There in her arms, where her cousin Gary lay, was a bubbling blob of ichor. "What? I don't understand." "This is all a dream. Please, wake up. That tall, thin man has been feeding on you. He's feeding on your fears. And now, he's feeding on my grandmother." She reached out to touch Joe's face. "Are you real?" "I am. Please, wake up. For my Nana's sake." The girl closed her eyes and her shape flickered away before she could even open them again. Lynette jerked in her sleep. "Honey," her husband was shaking her shoulder from the other side of the bed. "Honey, wake up. You're having a nightmare again." She woke up gasping as if air filled her lungs for the first time. She was no longer a little girl. She was back to being her 45-year-old self. "Mark?" she said, trying to clear her eyes. "You must have had a doozy," her husband said, rolling back over on his side. "You're all covered with sweat. Kept kicking me and whimpering in your sleep." "Oh, I'm sorry, honey. It was such a horrible dream." Do you want to talk about it?" It was 3 a.m. The last thing he wanted to do was listen to her describe one of her many nightmares. But he loved her, and he was a bit concerned for her. She had been having these night terrors for months. "Do you remember the story I told you about my Aunt Dottie's funeral?" He did, A fantastic story about some monster feeding on the souls of the dead. He thought it was just a childhood story that was remembered with a little overactive imagination that we always do when we recollect our past. Yeah, he said. It was about that, but there was someone different in the dream. A young guy, kind of scraggly looking. Long hair, long beard. He was trying to save his grandma's soul or something like that. Great. Now you're dreaming about strange bearded men coming to your rescue. I don't know, Mark. This seemed different somehow. Mark sat up and put his arms around his wife and kissed her forehead. Well, it's over now, he said. Do you want me to put some tea on to help you get back to sleep? No, she said. I think I'm going to stay up for a while. You want me to stay up with you? I'll be okay, honey. Go back to sleep. Mark plopped back down into his pillow gratefully. Let me know if you need anything. He was getting comfortable. After the last dreamer had awoken, Joe turned to face the thin man. The purple mist that was his grandmother was a dull gray cloud that was slowly dissipating. Grandma! He screamed. You're too late, Joseph, the thin man said with a smile. Grandma isn't here anymore. She belongs to me now. Joe sat on his knees before the House of Pavor Nocturnus. He felt defeated. Sadness threatened to drown him. And now you belong to me. The thin man reached out his thin hands and buried them deep into Joe's chest. He could feel the long fingers worming through his body, and sleep began to overtake him. The thin man's shape began to change. It was no longer the image of a dreamer. It was its true self. His features melted into a heaving mass of rotted black flesh. That's it, Joseph, it said inside his head. Give in. Let your mind, let your will be mine. I have taken many of your kind in the past, and I won't stop any time soon. With every beat of his heart, his energy was being pumped out of him. The world around him was getting dimmer. Don't be so hard on yourself. I've been at this for a very long time. You're just a rookie. He thought about the stories his grandmother told him. Sure, there were scary beasts that dwelled on his side of a reality, but there were beautiful things too. You fought well for the first time around, I must admit, but this is how it ends. I'll put you to sleep, and I'll keep you around as my prized milk cow. You'll feed me for generations, and I'll pull more dreamers in. He remembered the smock that flew around his grandmother's flowers, catching the butterflies that colored the already bright and beautiful fauna his grandma planted and cared for. And when the dreamers have given me their nightmares, I'll release them into the land of lucidity. Those children will feed on the populace. Oh, it will be glow. As his life force was drifting away from him, he felt a warm gust of wind light upon his face. What? What are you doing? The room was beginning to lighten up. As it got brighter, he got warmer. Stop this! At once! What is that? What's coming? There was a familiar whirring sound, but it was louder than he had remembered it. The sound vibrated so hard that he could feel it in his chest, where those long, life-taking fingers were embedded. What sort of madness is this? What is happening? Joe flicked his eyes open. The breeze had dried the tears from his cheeks. Before him, slithering above the quivering black mass of flesh, was a dragon, a smock. It gave off the warmth and light that blinded the room. It inhaled a deep gulp of air and then blew forth a blue arc of fire that drowned the house of night terrors. Screams bubbled up from its depthless flesh, and the smell made Joe retch. The smoke slithered around the house and bathed it in blue flames. When it had finished the job, it settled on the ground before Joe. "I knew you could do it," a familiar voice said. Dismounting from the smock was the little boy he once was. He held out his hand to Joe, and Joe took it. "Grandma is," Joe said sadly. "It's free," his younger self said. "Now let's get out of here. The nightmare creatures will smell this from miles away, and they're going to be hungry." They mounted the dragon, and the massive wings began to vibrate, and they were lifted into the air. "Holy fuck," Joe said, and sat straight up. He could hear the jukebox blurring out another outlaw country song from downstairs. He checked his body and then ran into the bathroom and let all the contents of his stomach go into the toilet. There was a knock at his apartment door. "You okay, boss man?" It was Jenny. "Does it sound like I'm okay?" Joe moaned. "Fair enough, crab ass. I'm finished closing. Got the money bags right here." Joe flushed the toilet and stood over the sink. He ran some cold water over his face and looked at his reflection. "I need to start doing heavy drugs," he muttered to himself. He dried his face and walked out and opened the door for Jenny. "Jesus H," she exclaimed. "You still look like shit." "Thanks." He grabbed the money bag from her and wished her a good night. He staggered over to his bed and fell onto his mattress. Joe hollered to his Alexa and told her to start to play Kiss Destroyer. She submitted, and Paul Stanley began to bellow as Joe fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of giant celestial turtles swimming across the great sea of stars. Afterward. Long ago, when I was a very young boy, I spotted a little lizard that was bright green with insectile wings. It flew about my mother's flower beds, eating the bees and the butterflies that fluttered about the petals. I followed it from the back of the house to the front, and with a loud pop it disappeared into thin air. I told my mom about it. She, of course, didn't believe me. So I went into my room, filled with every Star Wars toy under the sun in the late 70s, and grabbed the worn notebook on my dresser. I wrote a story about a place called the Land of Nod. It was a fantastical place that held the creatures and people that showed up in our dreams. There were unicorns, dragons, werewolves, vampires, Santa Claus, fairies, dwarves, brave heroes, superheroes, and the like living in this land. The story went on about a noble grandmother, because my grandma was the hero of my young life, who was tasked with guarding the bridge that separated our waking world from the land of Nod. And I was her apprentice. Who knows where those pages ended up? Lost to time, I guess. Or perhaps they lie on that tattered ancient bridge, yellowing and brittle. The end. All right. Holy cow, we went on for about 3 hours. 3 hours. Wow. So, anyway, thanks everybody for joining me on this long haul. But yeah, we finished the book. We finished the damn book. All right, that's pretty cool though. Anyway, I'm not going to babble on too much here. I am going to do a little celebratory cheers. Yeah, we made it through. Cheers, everybody. I'm also going to say to those of you that hung in there, like my cousin Cindy in New Zealand, Kyoto, Cindy, I love you. Thanks for hanging with me And Stephanie at work, I love you too. She's also listening. She's done with work. Has been for an hour. Anyway, yeah, thank you everybody for hanging out with me on this long haul. I don't know what I'm gonna do next on here. Hopefully something fun. If not fun, then thanks for being boring with me. Anyway, go on to Amazon, check out the book, buy it, or if you got Kindle Unlimited, get it for free, or buy it on Kindle. Either way, take a look at it. Get my other books if you haven't read them. Maybe that's what I'll do next. Is maybe I'll start reading my other books on here, and then put them on YouTube. Anyway, that's it. And we're done, and it's already past Halloween. It's after midnight. We're gonna let it all hang out. Okay, anyway. Yeah. Wow. I can't believe I went that long. So thanks everybody for joining me. Thanks for listening. If you're listening later on and not during the live, thank you for checking it out. And holding out for 3 hours. Damn. Yeah, it was a good time. I had a good time with you folks, and I will chat with you all soon. All right. Thanks again for checking this out. Thanks again for checking out my book. Thank you, Carrie, for buying a copy. Boom, right away. You've always been a very loyal reader, and everybody else that has checked it out. So, all right, have a great night or morning, I guess now. So, either way, till next time, deuces. And how do I shut this off? Bam. There we are. Have a good night, everybody. Love you.